in the fog-choked Yorkshire moors. Cryptic letter lures Hercule Poirot to the shadowy Ashburn Manor, where a storm traps him with a cast of strangers each hiding a deadly secret. Cursed sapphire dagger vanishes, threatening notes appear, and Lord Ashburn warns of an imminent murder. Oh, among the cunning heiress, the gruff colonel, the nervous doctor, or the enigmatic housekeeper plots to kill. As whispers of a family curse echo through the Gothic halls, Poirot's little gray cells race against time to unravel a web of betrayal, revenge, and hidden passages. And he unmask the killer before the storm claims them all. Or will the Manor's dark history bury the truth forever? Hercule Poirot's Dark Trial is a gripping Agatha Christie mystery where every glance hides a motive, every shadow a threat, and every clue a step toward a shocking revelation. Chapter 1. The Shadowed Invitation. The rain-slicked cobblestones of London glistened under the gaslights as Hercule Poirot stepped from the cab, his polished shoes clicking with a rhythm that matched the meticulous cadence of his thoughts. November evening was bitter, the air thick with fog that curled like a living thing around the street lamps. Poirot adjusted his overcoat, its collar turned up against the chill, and glanced at the letter clutched in his gloved hand. The elegant, looping script bore the name of Lord Reginald Ashburn, a man Poirot had not seen in nearly a decade, yet whose reputation as a reclusive aristocrat lingered in the detective's prodigious memory. The letter had arrived that morning at Poirot's modest yet impeccably ordered flat in Whitehaven Mansions. Its contents were brief but intriguing, penned with an urgency that piqued Poirot's curiosity. Lord Ashburn requested his presence at Ashburn Manor, a sprawling estate nestled in the desolate Yorkshire moors, for a matter of grave consequence. The letter hinted at a secret, one that threatened not only the Ashburn family, but all who gathered under its ancient roof. No further details were provided, only an insistence that Poirot arrive by the evening train, for a man whose life was governed by order and reason. The vagueness of the summons was both an irritation and an irresistible challenge. Poirot had boarded the train at King's Cross, his mind already turning over possibilities. Lord Ashburn, he recalled, was a man of refined tastes but guarded demeanor. Widowed, young, and childless, his life shrouded in the sort of mystery that wealth and isolation often breed. Their acquaintance had been brief, a consultation years ago over a stolen painting that Poirot had resolved with his characteristic flair. Why, then, this sudden call, and why the cryptic tone? As the train rattled north, slicing through the darkening countryside, Poirot's little gray cells hummed with anticipation. Now, as he stood before the imposing gates of Ashburn Manor, the detective felt the weight of the unknown settle over him. The gates, wrought iron and adorned with the Ashburn crest raven clutching a sapphire, creaked open, revealing a long gravel drive flanked by skeletal trees. A carriage awaited, its driver a silent figure in a heavy cloak, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Poirot climbed aboard, noting the driver's reluctance to meet his gaze. The carriage lurched forward, the rhythmic clop of hooves the only sound in the oppressive stillness. The manor loomed into view, a Gothic edifice of weathered stone and pointed arches, its windows glowing faintly against the storm clouds gathering. Overhead, ivy clung to its walls like a desperate lover, and the air carried the faint scent of damp earth and decay. Poirot's keen eyes scanned the structure, noting the turrets that stood like sentinels and the gargoyles perched menacingly along the roofline. It was a place that whispered of secrets, of histories buried beneath layers of time. As the carriage halted, a butler emerged from the heavy oak doors, his gaunt frame illuminated by the flickering light of a lantern. "Monsieur Poirot," he intoned, his voice as dry as the gravel underfoot. "Lord Ashburn awaits you in the drawing-room. This way, if you please." Poirot followed, his cane tapping a steady rhythm as he crossed the threshold into a grand hall. The interior was a study in opulence, tempered by neglect. Crystal chandeliers hung heavy with dust, and portraits of stern-faced Ashburns lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow him. The butler led him through a maze of corridors, each turn revealing glimpses of faded grandeur tapestries fraying at the edges. Marble floors dulled by time. The drawing room was a cavernous space, its high ceilings lost in shadow. A fire roared in the massive hearth, casting dancing light across a group of strangers gathered around a mahogany table. Lord Ashburn stood at the head, his silver hair catching the firelight, his face etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights. He was tall, his posture rigid, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as he greeted Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "your presence honors us. I trust your journey was not too taxing." "Mais non, Lord Ashburn," Poirot replied, his voice smooth as velvet. "The journey was most agreeable, though I confess your letter has left me with many questions." Ashburn's smile was tight. "All will be explained, my friend, but first allow me to introduce my guests." Poirot's gaze swept the room, cataloging each face with the precision of a watchmaker. There was Colonel Mortimer Hargreaves, a barrel-chested man with a bristling mustache and a scowl that suggested a lifetime of barking orders. Beside him sat Lady Beatrice Langley, an heiress whose sharp green eyes and crimson gown exuded a predatory elegance. Dr. Ernest Whitmore, a wiry man with nervous hands and spectacles perched precariously on his nose, fidgeted in his seat. Lastly, Mrs. Clara Henshaw, the housekeeper, stood apart, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun, her expression unreadable as she clutched a silver tray. "An eclectic gathering," Poirot remarked, his mustache twitching slightly. "And what, pray tell, has brought such a company to this remote corner of England?" Ashburn's gaze darkened. "Matter of life and death, Monsieur Poirot. But come, let us dine. Storm approaches, and we have much to discuss." Its dining room was no less grand, its long table set with gleaming silver and crystal. As the guests took their seats, Poirot noted the undercurrents of tension. The colonel's curt nod to Lady Beatrice, the doctor's avoidance of eye contact, the housekeeper's silent efficiency as she directed the servants. The meal, roast, pheasant, glazed vegetables, and a rich claret was served with precision. Yet the atmosphere was anything but convivial. Conversation began haltingly, with Ashburn steering it toward trivialities, the weather, the state of the moors, the history of the manor. Poirot listened, his eyes darting from one guest to another, noting the colonel's clenched jaw, Lady Beatrice's sly smiles, and the doctor's tendency to spill his wine. Mrs. Henshaw, though silent, seemed to hover at the edge of every exchange, her presence both unobtrusive and omnipresent. It was during the dessert course, as a creamy syllabub was served, that Ashburn's demeanor shifted. He set down his spoon and leaned forward, his voice low but commanding. "My friends," he began, "I have not been entirely forthcoming about the purpose of this gathering. You are here because I believe one among us harbors a grave intent, plan to commit murder." A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice's spoon clattered against her dish, and Dr. Whitmore's face paled. Colonel Hargreaves snorted, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Mrs. Henshaw remained impassive, though her hands tightened around the tray. Poirot's mustache quivered with interest. "Mon Dieu, Lord Ashburn, this is a most serious accusation. Have you evidence to support such a claim?" Ashburn's gaze was steady. "It's not evidence, Monsieur Poirot, but instincting a series of disturbing events. The sapphire-encrusted dagger, an heirloom of my family, has vanished from its case. Notes have appeared, cryptic and threatening, warning of a reckoning, and there are other signs. I fear for my life, and perhaps for others." The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire in the distant howl of the wind. Mind raced, cataloging the implications. A missing dagger, threatening notes, a group of strangers with unknown motives. This was a puzzle worthy of his intellect. "Tell me, Lord Ashburn," Poirot said, his voice calm but probing, "this dagger, why is it of such significance?" Ashburn hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "It is an artifact of great value, both monetary and sentimental. My grandfather acquired it under questionable circumstances during his travels in the East. Some say it carries a curse, a tale of betrayal and vengeance. I dismiss such stories as superstition, but recent events have made me question my skepticism." Lady Beatrice laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "It's a curse. Really, Reginald, you sound like a Gothic novel. Surely you don't believe such nonsense." "Believe in what I see," Ashburn replied curtly, "and I see danger." Colonel Hargreaves slammed his fist on the table. "Enough of this melodrama. If there's a threat, name the culprit. Man, don't drag us all into your paranoia." Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat, his voice trembling. Perhaps we should all retire for the night. The storm is worsening, and this talk is unsettling." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Nan, Miss Amos. To retire now would be to ignore the shadow that looms over us. Tell me, each of you, why are you here? What connection do you have to Lord Ashburn in this manner?" The question hung in the air, heavy as the storm clouds outside. Lady Beatrice spoke first, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm here because Reginald begged me to come. We were close once before his brother's unfortunate end. I thought my presence might lend clarity." "Clarity," Colonel Hargreaves scoffed. "You're here for the money, Beatrice. Don't pretend otherwise. Ashburn's been dangling his fortune like a carrot for years. And you, Colonel?" Poirot interjected, his eyes gleaming. "What brings a man of your stature to this remote place?" Hargreaves bristled. "Business. Ashburn and I have investments sold debts to settle. Nothing more." Dr. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. I was invited to consult on a medical matter. Lord Ashburn's health, you see, spent under strain." Poirot's gaze turned to Mrs. Henshaw, who had remained silent. "And you, madame? Your role here is more than that of a housekeeper. Nest, pas." Her lips tightened, but she met his eyes. "Serve the Ashburn family, monsieur. I have for decades. My reasons are my own." Poirot nodded, filing away her reticence. The storm outside roared, a gust rattling the windows. A servant entered, whispering urgently to Mrs. Henshaw, who excused herself. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, and Poirot sensed the moment was ripe for observation. As the meal concluded, Ashburn rose. "Monsieur Poirot, I entrust this matter to you. Find the truth before it is too late. The rest of you, I suggest that you guard your doors tonight." The guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the vast halls. Poirot lingered, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The dagger, the notes, the cursed siege was a thread in a tapestry he was determined to unravel. He retired to his room, a small but elegant chamber with a four-poster bed and a window overlooking the storm-tossed moors. As he unpacked his suitcase, his fingers brushed against the folded slip of paper that had not been there before. He opened it, his heart quickening. In a jagged scrawl, it read, "Leave before dawn, or share the curse." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Mon ami," he murmured to the empty room, "you have underestimated Hercule Poirot." He tucked the note into his pocket, his resolve hardening. The game had begun, and he would play it to its end. The chapter closed with Poirot seated at the room's small desk, his notebook open, sketching a mental map of motives and secrets. The storm's howl, a fitting backdrop to the mystery unfolding within Ashburn Manor. Chapter 2. The first cracked the heavy oak doors of Ashburn Manor, groaned as Hercule Poirot stepped into the grand dining room, his polished shoes clicking softly against the polished parquet floor. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax from the candelabras, their flickering flames casting long shadows across the mahogany table, set for an elaborate dinner. The storm outside raged on, its howling winds rattling the leaded windows, toned as if the Yorkshire moors themselves were conspiring to keep the guests imprisoned within the manor's ancient walls. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the assembled company, a group as eclectic as it was uneasy. Each face a canvas of secrets, painted with forced smiles and guarded glances. Lord Reginald Ashburn sat at the head of the table, his gaunt frame draped in a tailored velvet jacket, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier's glow. His eyes, however, betrayed a restlessness that Poirot noted immediately, a flicker of fear, perhaps, or a calculation. To his left sat Colonel Rupert Hargreaves, a man whose military bearing was evident in his rigid posture, though his weathered hands fidgeted with a silver fork, betraying a crack in his stoic facade. Across from him was Lady Beatrice Langley, the heiress, her auburn curls cascading over an emerald green gown that shimmered with every movement. Her lips curled into a sardonic smile as she surveyed the room, her eyes lingering on the colonel with a mixture of disdain and amusement. Dr. Percival Wren, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, sat beside her, his fingers drumming an erratic rhythm on the tablecloth, and at the far end, hovering like a shadow, was Mrs. Agnes Thorpe, the housekeeper, her gaunt face unreadable as she poured wine with a precision that bordered on mechanical. Poirot, seated near Lord Ashburn, adjusted his bow tie and folded his hands neatly in his lap, his mustache twitching slightly as he absorbed the undercurrents of tension. The meal began with a consomme, its delicate aroma doing little to ease the palpable unease. The clink of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation filled the room. But Poirot's mind was elsewhere, cataloging every gesture, every sidelong glance, every pause that lingered a moment too long. An exquisite broth, Lord Ashburn, Poirot said, his voice smooth and accented, breaking the silence. It is a rare thing, is it not, to find such refinement in so remote a place? Lord Ashburn offered a tight smile. The manor has its charms, Monsieur Poirot, though they are often overshadowed by its peculiarities. Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the air, sharp and teasing. You mean the drafts, the creaks, or the rumors of curses? Really, Reginald, you must stop indulging Mrs. Thorpe's Gothic tales. Mrs. Thorpe's hand paused mid-pour, her eyes narrowing at Lady Beatrice, but she said nothing, resuming her task with a deliberate slowness. Poirot noted the exchange, his gaze flicking to the housekeeper's clenched jaw. Curses are nonsense. Colonel Hargreaves barked, his voice rough as gravel. Superstition is for fools who can't face facts. This manor's only curse is its isolation and the company it keeps. His eyes darted toward Lady Beatrice, who met his glare with a raised eyebrow. Now, Colonel, Dr. Wren interjected, his voice high and nervous. Let's not spoil the evening with such talk. We're here to enjoy Lord Ashburn's hospitality, not to bicker. Lady Beatrice laughed, a sound like shattering glass. I'd say we're doing far more than that. There's a thief among us, after all. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Or have we all forgotten the little matter of the missing dagger? The room stilled. Poirot's fingers tightened around his spoon, though his expression remained placid. Lord Ashburn had mentioned the sapphire-encrusted dagger earlier that evening, a family heirloom of immense value, both monetary and sentimental. Its disappearance, he had claimed, was no mere theft, but a harbinger of something far more sinister. The guests had reacted with varying degrees of shock, suspicion, and denial. But now, with Lady Beatrice's words hanging in the air, the accusation felt like a spark in a powder keg. "Beatrice, that's enough," Lord Ashburn said, his voice low but firm. "The dagger's absence is troubling, yes, but let us not leap to conclusions. Lady Beatrice leaned back, swirling her wine-glass. "Oh, I think we're all drawing them, Reginald. A priceless relic vanishes, and we're all locked in this god-forsaken manor with a storm raging outside. It's positively theatrical." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Madame, you speak as if the theft amuses you, yet I sense a certain unease beneath your words. Perhaps you know more of this dagger than you let on." Lady Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm flattered by your scrutiny, but I assure you I have no interest in dusty old knives, no matter how many sapphires they boast." "Then why?" Colonel Hargreaves growled. "Do you keep harping on it? If you've got something to say, woman, spit it out. Enough." Lord Ashburn slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The guests froze, their eyes wide. He took a deep breath, his composure fraying. "This is precisely what I feared. The dagger is more than a trinket, a symbol of this family's legacy, and its loss is a warning. A warning." Dr. Wren's voice trembled. "Of what, exactly?" Lord Ashburn hesitated, his gaze sweeping the table. "That is what I've asked Monsieur Poirot to uncover. Someone in this room knows more than they're saying. And I fear." He stopped, his lips pressing into a thin line. Poirot leaned forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Lord Ashburn, you spoke earlier of a threat, of a murder planned within these walls. The dagger, it seems, is central to this mystery. Tell me, what is its significance? Why does its absence provoke such fear?" The room fell silent, the only sound the distant howl of the storm. Lord Ashburn's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. "The dagger," he began, "has been in my family for centuries. It was forged for an ancestor, Sir Bartholomew Ashburn, a man of questionable honor. The sapphires were said to be a gift from a foreign prince, but the blade itself has a darker history. It's been linked to every tragedy this family has endured: betrayals, deaths, scandals. Some say it's cursed. Colonel Hargreaves snorted, but his bravado seemed forced. "Poppycock, it's a blade, nothing more. It." Mrs. Thorpe's voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried a weight that silenced the room. She stepped forward, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. "The dagger has a will of its own, Colonel. It finds its way to those who deserve its judgment." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Madame Thorpe, you speak as if you believe this curse. Tell me, what do you know of this dagger's history?" The housekeeper's lips parted, but she hesitated, glancing at Lord Ashburn. "It's not my place, sir. The manor keeps its secrets, and I'm just its keeper." "Then perhaps," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing, "you can tell us why you were seen near the display case where the dagger was kept, just hours before it vanished." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Thorpe's face paled, her hands clutching the wine decanter tightly. "I was cleaning, monsieur. The case needed polishing. I swear, I didn't take it. Cleaning at midnight." Lady Beatrice's voice dripped with skepticism. "Really, Mrs. Thorpe, you'll have to do better than that." "Beatrice, hold your tongue," Lord Ashburn snapped. "Mrs. Thorpe has served this family for decades. Her loyalty is beyond question." "Sit." Colonel Hargreaves leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Loyalty doesn't mean innocence. I've seen men swear allegiance with one hand while holding a knife in the other." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. Ease amis, accusations without evidence are like candles without flame, useless and dim. Let us focus on what we know. The dagger is gone. Its absence has stirred fear and suspicion. And yet, I believe its theft is not the end, but the beginning of a larger design. Someone in this room wished to unsettle us, to set us against one another. The question is, why? The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces a mosaic of guilt, fear, and defiance. Poirot's eyes lingered on each in turn, his mind working like a finely tuned machine, cataloging their reactions. The colonel's clenched fist, Lady Beatrice's forced nonchalance. Dr. Wren's nervous tick of adjusting his spectacles. Mrs. Thorpe's rigid posture itch was a piece of the puzzle. And Poirot was determined to fit them together. Dinner concluded. In strained silence, the guests retiring to their rooms with murmured excuses. Poirot, however, lingered in the dining room, his fingers tracing the edge of the table as he replayed the evening's events. The dagger's theft was no random act. It was a calculated move, designed to provoke. But provoke what? Fear, division, or something more sinister? As the candles burned low, Poirot made his way to his room, spacious chamber adorned with heavy drapes and a four-poster bed. The storm outside showed no sign of abating, its fury a constant reminder of their isolation. He locked the door behind him, his movements precise, and began to unpack his small suitcase, his mind still churning. It was then that he noticed it a slip of paper tucked beneath the edge of his pillow. His heart quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. He unfolded the note with care, his eyes scanning the hurried scrawl. Leave before dawn, or you will regret it. Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. Mon Dieu, he murmured. A game, it deepens. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, his mind already racing with possibilities. The warning was not a threat, but a clue, a sign that someone feared his presence, his ability to unravel their secrets. But who? And why now? He sat at the small writing desk, his notebook open before him. With meticulous care, he began to sketch a mental map of motives, each guest a node in a web of suspicion. The colonel's disdain for Lady Beatrice, rooted in some past slight, perhaps. The heiress's barbed wit, a shield for her own secrets. Dr. Wren's nervous demeanor, a sign of guilt or merely fear. And Mrs. Thorpe, with her cryptic warnings and intimate knowledge of the manor's history, what role did she play in this unfolding drama? The storm roared outside, but within the walls of Ashburn Manor, a different tempest was brewing, one of lies, betrayal, and hidden truths. Poirot closed his notebook, his eyes gleaming with determination. The dagger was the key, and he would find it, along with the hand that had taken it. The night was young, and Hercule Poirot was only beginning. The hours crept by, and Poirot paced his room, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. The note's warning echoed in his thoughts, not as a deterrent, but as fuel for his resolve. He had faced such threats before, in cases that tested the limits of human deceit, and each time his little gray cells had prevailed. This would be no different. He turned his attention to the guests, reconstructing their interactions at dinner. The colonel's hostility toward Lady Beatrice was palpable, but was it personal, or did it mask a deeper motive? Her taunts had been calculated, designed to provoke, but they also revealed her own unease. Dr. Wren's fidgeting suggested a man on the edge, his nervous energy a stark contrast to the calm precision of a physician. And Mrs. Thorpe, her cryptic mutterings about the dagger's curse were more than superstition. Poirot was certain. She knew something, perhaps more than Lord Ashburn himself. He paused by the window, gazing out at the storm-lashed moors. The manor felt alive, its creaking timbers and shadowed corners whispering secrets. The dagger, with its saffron-crusted hilt and blood-soaked history, was the linchpin of this mystery. God's theft was not about wealth, though its value was immense, but about power, about control over the narrative of Ashburn Manor. A soft knock at the door startled him from his reverie. He opened it to find Mrs. Thorpe, her face pale in the dim light of the hallway. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I must speak with you. Alone." Poirot gestured for her to enter, closing the door behind her. "Madame, you have my attention. What is it that troubles you?" She hesitated, her hands twisting in her apron. "The dagger. It's not just a relic. It's a debt, a blood debt. The Ashburns have paid for it in ways you cannot imagine." "Explain, s'il vous plaît," Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. "What is this debt, and why does it drive someone to steal?" Mrs. Thorpe's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting an eavesdropper. "Years ago, Sir Bartholomew Ashburn betrayed a Manor prince, they say, who gifted him the dagger. The prince cursed the blade, vowing that it would bring ruin to the family until the debt was paid. Every generation, someone dies because of it. And now it's gone. And I fear what comes next." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "And you believe this curse is real, madame? Or is it a convenient tale to hide a more earthly crime?" Her lips trembled, but she held his gaze. "I've seen things in this house, monsieur, things that cannot be explained. But I swear, I didn't take the dagger. I only tried to protect it." "Protect it?" Poirot's voice was soft, but his mind was racing. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I cannot say, not yet. But you must be careful, monsieur. The Manor has eyes, and they watch you." Before Poirot could press further, a distant crash echoed through the house, followed by a muffled cry. Mrs. Thorpe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Poirot was already moving, his cane in hand, as he strode toward the door. "Stay here, madame," he commanded. "I will investigate." The hallway was dark, the candle snuffed out by a draft that carried the chill of the storm. Poirot moved swiftly, his senses alert, following the sound to the grand staircase. There, at the foot of the stairs, lay a shattered vase, its fragments scattered across the marble floor. Above, a shadow moved, fleeting and silent, disappearing into the upper corridor. Poirot's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the thrill of the chase. He ascended the stairs, his steps measured but swift, his eyes scanning the darkness. Manor was a labyrinth, its corridors twisting and turning, but Poirot's mind was a map, charting every detail. The shadow had moved toward the guest wing, where the others were quartered. Was it the thief, returning to cover their tracks, or something else entirely? He reached the corridor and paused, listening. A soft creak came from Lady Beatrice's room, followed by a whispered curse. Poirot approached, knocking lightly. "Madame Langley, are you awake?" The door opened a crack, revealing Lady Beatrice, her face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, what on earth are you doing prowling about at this hour?" "I heard a disturbance," he said, his eyes scanning her room. "A vase shattered downstairs, and a shadow moving in this direction." Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a wry smile. "A shadow? Really, monsieur, you're beginning to sound like Mrs. Thorpe. Perhaps the Manor's ghosts are restless tonight." Poirot's expression remained impassive. "Ghosts, madame, do not break vases, nor do they leave notes under pillows. Tell me, have you seen anything unusual this evening?" Gah! She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the doorframe. I thought I heard footsteps earlier outside my door, but I assumed it was that wretched housekeeper skulking about." "Footsteps," Poirot repeated, his mind cataloging the detail. And you did not investigate?" "I'm not in the habit of chasing noises in the night," she said sharply. "If you must know, I was reading. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get some sleep." Poirot nodded, stepping back. Of course, Madame Whodunit. As the door closed, he lingered, his eyes narrowing. Lady Beatrice's composure was a facade, he was certain. Her mention of footsteps corroborated his own observations, but her dismissal of them was too quick, too practiced. She was hiding something, perhaps not the dagger itself, but a piece of the puzzle. He returned to his room, his mind ablaze with questions. The note, the shattered vase, the shadow in the corridor were threads in a tapestry of deceit. The dagger's theft was the first crack in the manor's facade, and Poirot was determined to widen it, to expose the truth beneath. As he settled into his chair, he opened his notebook once more, sketching a diagram of the manor's layout and the guests' rooms. The Colonel, Lady Beatrice, Dr. Wren, Mrs. Thorpe, Lord Ashburn, each was a suspect, each a potential victim. The note warned him to leave, but Poirot had no intention of doing so. The game was afoot, and he would play it to the end. The storm outside roared on, but within Hercule Poirot's mind, a different storm was brewing, one of logic, deduction, and unrelenting pursuit of the truth. The night was far from over, and the first crack had only begun to spread. Chapter 3. Whispers in the dark. The storm that had descended upon Ashburn Manor was no mere inconvenience. It was a malevolent force, a howling beast that rattled the ancient windows and sent drafts creeping through the crevices of the old stone walls. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of his room, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of a single candle, its flame flickering as if in protest against the wind's relentless assault. The cryptic note he had discovered beneath his pillow, an elegant scrawl warning him to leave before dawn, lay folded on the mahogany desk, its words etched into his mind. "Leave, Monsieur Poirot, before the shadows claim you." It was theatrical, yes, but Poirot was not a man to dismiss theatrics when they carried the scent of danger. He adjusted his cravat, his movements precise despite the hour, and considered the note's implications. Someone in this manner, among the eclectic gathering of guests, wished to unsettle him. But why? Was it fear of his reputation, the unerring precision of his little gray cells? Or was it a gambit, a calculated move to distract him from the truth? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Mon ami," he murmured to himself, "you underestimate Hercule Poirot if you think a mere note will send him fleeing into the night." The manor was silent, save for the storm's cacophony, but silence in such a place was deceptive. It was the silence of a coiled snake, poised to strike. Poirot took his candle and stepped into the corridor, its long shadows dancing across portraits of stern-faced Ashburns, their eyes seeming to follow him. He had resolved to begin his interviews at first light, to peel back the layers of this peculiar assembly, but the night had other plans. A scream, sharp and piercing, shattered the stillness, echoing from the depths of the manor. Poirot's heart quickened, but his steps remained measured as he followed the sound, descending the grand staircase with the grace of a man who knew the value of composure. The scream had come from the library, a cavernous room lined with bookshelves that stretched to the vaulted ceiling, their leather-bound tomes exuding the musty scent of time. The door was ajar, and as Poirot entered, he saw the housekeeper, Mrs. Clara Wren, slumped on the floor, her wiry frame crumpled like a discarded marionette. In her hand, clutched with a desperation that suggested more than mere fear, was a torn page, its edges jagged as if ripped in haste. "Madame Wren?" Poirot called, kneeling beside her. Eyes fluttered open, their gray depths clouded with confusion, but she was alive. He gently eased the page from her grip, noting the faint tremble in her fingers. The other guests were arriving now, drawn by the screen, their faces a gallery of suspicion and alarm. Lord Reginald Ashburn, his silver hair disheveled, pushed through first, his voice sharp. "What in God's name is happening here?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Calm yourselves. Mies Amos. Madame Wren requires assistance, not an inquisition. He turned to the nervous doctor, Dr. Alistair Crane, who hovered at the edge of the group, his spectacles glinting in the candlelight. Monsieur le Docteur, if you please. Dr. Crane hurried forward, his movements jerky, as if he were a puppet himself, strings pulled by unseen hands. He checked Mrs. Wren's pulse, his brow furrowing. She's fainted. Nothing more. A shock, perhaps. I'll fetch my bag some smelling salts, should do. As the doctor scurried off, Poirot's gaze fell to the page in his hand. The script was old, faded, but legible, written in a flowing hand that spoke of an earlier era. The words were chilling. The blood debt of the Ashburns must be paid. Heir shall escape the curse of the betrayed. Below it, a date, 1873. Poirot's mind raced. A blood debt, a curse. Such terms were the stuff of Gothic novels, yet here they were, clutched by a woman who had collapsed in terror. Lady Beatrice Harrow, the sharp-tongued heiress, stepped forward, her emerald gown shimmering like a serpent's. Scales? What is that, Monsieur Poirot? Another of this house's morbid secrets. Her voice was laced with disdain, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot folded the page carefully, slipping it into his pocket. It is a clue. Madame and Hercule Poirot does not ignore clues, no matter how theatrical they may seem. He turned to the group, his mustache twitching as he surveyed them. Lord Ashburn, his face a mask of aristocratic control. Colonel Mortimer Blake, his jaw set like a bulldog's, and the doctor, returning now with his medical bag, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the clasp. Each of them, Poirot knew, held a piece of the puzzle. Madame Wren, Poirot said softly, as the housekeeper stirred, revived by the doctor's salts. What caused such distress? This page? Perhaps. Her eyes widened, and she clutched at Poirot's sleeve, her voice a hoarse whisper. It was her, the woman in white. I saw her, monsieur, in the shadows of the library. She pointed at me, and then she shuddered, unable to continue. A woman in white. Colonel Blake scoffed, his voice booming. Ghosts now, is it? This place is turning into a penny dreadful. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Monsieur le Colonel, in my experience, ghosts are often the shadows of truth cast by guilty consciences. Let us not dismiss Madame Wren's words so quickly. He helped Mrs. Wren to a chair, noting the way her gaze darted to Lord Ashburn, as if seeking permission to speak, or perhaps forgiveness for speaking at all. Poirot filed this observation away, his mind already weaving connections. The housekeeper's fear, the cryptic note, the journal page. The missing daggerel were threads in a tapestry he was determined to unravel. The morning broke with a gray, oppressive light, the storm still raging outside. Poirot had locked the journal page in his suitcase, its words burning in his memory. He began his interviews in the drawing room, a space of faded grandeur with heavy drapes and a fire that did little to banish the chill. His first subject was Lady Beatrice, who entered with the air of a queen granting an audience, her chin tilted defiantly. Madame Harrow, Poirot began, his tone smooth as velvet. You are, I understand, well acquainted with the Ashburn family. Perhaps you can enlighten me about this Kagard, the sapphire-encrusted one that has caused such a stir. Lady Beatrice's lips curled into a smile that was more weapon than warmth. You waste no time, Monsieur Poirot. Very well. The dagger is an Ashburn heirloom, a ghastly thing, really, all sharp edges and ostentatious gems. It was said to be a gift from a Russian noble in the last century, but there's a nastier story attached to it, a scandal, you see. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It was used, they say, to murder a rival suitor of an Ashburn bride. The family hushed it up, but the stain remains. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And this scandal, madame, does it touch you personally?" Her smile faltered, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing a flicker of pain. "You are perceptive, monsieur." "Yes, it touches me. I was close to Reginald's brother, Charles, before his death. The dagger was involved, indirectly. A foolish quarrel, a duel gone wrong. Quas. Oh, society loves to paint a woman as the villain." Her voice hardened. "But I assure you, I had no hand in his death." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And yet, madame, the dagger's disappearance now, at this gathering, suggests someone wishes to resurrect old wounds. Have you enemies here?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "Enemies? In this house, everyone is an enemy to someone. The colonel despises me for my wealth. The doctor fears me for what I know of his past. And Mrs. Wren, well, she's a shadow, always watching, always whispering. As for Reginald, he invited me here, but I don't trust his motives. He's hiding something, Monsieur Poirot. They all are." Poirot dismissed her with a polite bow, his mind cataloging her words. Lady Beatrice was a woman of secrets, her poise a shield for deeper wounds. The dagger, the scandal, the death of Charles Ashburnese were not mere anecdotes, but keys to the manor's dark heart. Next, Poirot summoned Colonel Blake, who entered with the swagger of a man accustomed to command, his military bearing at odds with the nervous twitch of his mustache. "Let's make this quick, Poirot," he growled, sinking into a chair. "No patience for this nonsense about ghosts and curses." Poirot smiled, unruffled. "Then let us speak of facts, Monsieur le Colonel. You served with Lord Ashburn's father during the war, Nan. There are whispers of irregularities in that time. Perhaps you can clarify." The colonel's face reddened, his fists clenching. "Irregularities. Damned impertinence. I served with honor, Poirot, unlike some. But yes, there was a Matara betrayal, if you must know. Spurn's father, Sir Henry, made a devil's bargain with the enemy to save his own skin. I got a fortune for it too, while good men died. I was there, saw it all, never forgave him for it. And this dagger, Poirot pressed, it was part of this bargain." The colonel hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "Might have been. Boils of war, they called it. Taken from some foreign officer, I reckon. Sir Henry prized it, said it was his luck. Lot of good it did him. He died not long after. Heart gave out, or so they said." His voice dropped, a note of bitterness creeping in. "This family's rotten, Poirot. Always has been." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "And yet, you accepted Lord Ashburn's invitation. Why, monsieur, if you hold such contempt?" The colonel's jaw tightened. Reginald said he wanted to make amends, clear the air. Thought I'd hear him out. Mistake, maybe. This place reeks of lies. Poirot dismissed him, his mind buzzing. The colonel's anger was genuine, but his story felt incomplete, as if he were guarding a deeper truth. A Tate, the wartime betrayal, the dagger, the death of Sir Henry, these were pieces of a larger puzzle. Poirot was determined to fit them together. As the day wore on, Poirot interviewed the others, each adding a fragment to the mosaic. Dr. Crane, fidgeting with his spectacles, spoke vaguely of his time as the Ashburn family physician, hinting at medical records he'd rather not discuss. Mrs. Wren, covered but still pale, was evasive, her answers laced with references to the Manors, dark history, and the woman in white she swore she'd seen. Lord Ashburn himself was the most elusive, his polished charm deflecting Poirot's questions with practiced ease. "I invited you here, Monsieur Poirot, because I trust your discretion," he said, his eyes cold. "There are matters in this house that need resolving, but I fear they are beyond even your talents." Poirot smiled thinly. "There is nothing, monsieur, that is beyond the talents of Hercule Poirot. By evening, the storm had not relented, and the manor felt like a pressure cooker, the guests' nerves fraying under the weight of suspicion. Poirot returned to his room, locking the door behind him, retrieved the journal page from his suitcase, spreading it out under the candlelight. The words blood, debt, and curse stood out like accusations, but it was the date 1873 that intrigued him most. He recalled Mrs. Wren's mention of the woman in white, a figure tied to the manor's past. Was she a ghost, as the housekeeper claimed, or a symbol of something more tangible, a betrayal, a murder, a secret buried in the Ashburn legacy? He paced the room, his mind a whirlwind of connections. A note warning him to leave, the daggers, disappearance, the journal page, the scream in the library all pointed to a carefully orchestrated drama. But by whom? And why? Poirot stopped, his eyes narrowing. The truth, he murmured, is in the shadows, but Hercule Poirot will bring it to the light. As he prepared for bed, a soft knock came at the door. He opened it to find Mrs. Wren, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "there's something you must know. The woman in white, she's not a ghost. She was real, once. And her death, it's why this house is cursed." Poirot's heart quickened, but he kept his voice calm. "Tell me, madame, everything." She hesitated, glancing down the corridor as if expecting the shadows to eavesdrop. Her name was Eleanor, she began, her voice barely audible. She was an Ashburn, a cousin, promised to a man who loved her. But the family, they betrayed her, for the dagger, for power. She died here, in this house, and her blood. She broke off, tears in her eyes. The journal page, Monsieur, it's hers. She wrote it before she died. Poirot's mind raced, the pieces clicking into place. Eleanor, the dagger, the blood debt, these were not mere stories, but the roots of the manor's darkness. He thanked Mrs. Wren, urging her to rest, and closed the door. His resolve hardened. The night was far from over, and the shadows held more secrets yet. He sat at the desk, a candle casting long shadows across the room, and began to write, his pen scratching out a list of names, motives, and connections. The journal page, key. New was the key, its words a map to the truth. As the storm roared outside, Poirot locked the page back in his suitcase, satisfied that he was one step closer to unraveling the mystery. The manor was a labyrinth of lies, but Hercule Poirot was no stranger to labyrinths. By morning, he vowed, he would decode the journal's meaning and bring the shadows into the light. Chapter 4. The locked room. The storm over Ashburn Manor had grown into a beast of its own. Its howling winds, rattling the ancient windows and sending drafts skittering through the stone corridors like restless spirits. Rain lashed the Yorkshire moors, transforming the grounds into a quagmire of mud and shadow, isolating the manor from the outside world as effectively as a prison wall. Hercule Poirot, his small frame wrapped in a woolen overcoat, stood at the window of the grand hall, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon where lightning cracked the sky like a whip. The isolation was complete. No telephone, no telegraph, no hope of escape until the tempest relented. For Poirot, this was no inconvenience, but an opportunity. The murderer, whoever they were, was trapped within these walls, and he would find them. The morning had begun with a grim discovery. Lord Reginald Ashburn, pale and agitated, had summoned Poirot to his private study at the heart of the manor. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable, a tremor that betrayed fear beneath his aristocratic composure. "Monsieur Poirot," he had said, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, "I fear something terrible has happened. My study is locked, and I cannot gain entry. I heard noises last night, strange ones, from within. I beg you, come quickly." Poirot, ever precise, had followed Lord Ashburn through the manor's labyrinthine halls. Noting the way the man's shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. The other guest, Colonel Mortimer Hargreaves, Lady Beatrice Winthrop, Dr. Evelyn Strathmore, and the cryptic housekeeper, Mrs. Clara Dunworth, had trailed behind, their faces a gallery of unease. The colonel's mustache twitched with impatience. Lady Beatrice's lips were pressed into a thin line, and Dr. Strathmore's hands fidgeted with the cuffs of her blouse. Mrs. Dunworth, silent as ever, clutched a ring of keys so tightly her knuckles whitened. They reached the study door. A heavy oak slab carved with intricate vines, its brass handle gleaming dully in the dim light of a flickering sconce. Lord Ashburn produced a key, but when he turned it, the lock refused to yield. He tried again, his movements growing frantic. "It's impossible," he muttered. "This is my own key. It has never failed before." Poirot stepped forward, his mustache twitching slightly as he assessed the situation. "Permit me, monsieur," he said, taking the key and examining it with the care of a jeweler inspecting a flawed gem. He inserted it, turned it, and felt the resistance. "Curio," he murmured. "The lock, it is not broken, but it resists. This suggests an obstruction, perhaps from within, an obstruction." Lady Beatrice's voice was sharp, her emerald eyes narrowing. "What could possibly obstruct a lock from the inside? You suggesting someone is in there?" Poirot's gaze flicked to her, noting the way her fingers tightened around the pearl necklace at her throat. "It is possible, madame, or perhaps something else prevents the key's function. We must investigate." Colonel Hargreaves, his face ruddy from years of whiskey and sun, snorted. "Investigate. Break the damned door down, man. If there's trouble, we face it head on, not with tiptoeing and theories." Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Patience, Colonel. To act rashly is to destroy evidence. It's the door. It will yield, but first we must understand why it resists." Dr. Strathmore, her pale face framed by a severe bun, spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "Could it be a malfunction? These old houses, their mechanisms are often faulty. Perhaps the storm has caused some structural issue. Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp as they studied her. "But I suspect this is no accident of architecture. Monsieur Ashburn, you heard noises? We described them. S'il vous plaît." Lord Ashburn hesitated, his gaze darting to the guests before returning to Poirot. "It was a scraping, like metal on wood, and then a thud, heavy, as if something fell. I thought perhaps a shelf had collapsed, but now," trailed off, his eyes fixed on the door. Poirot nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. "We must gain entry. Colonel, your strength may yet be useful. But first, I will attempt a less destructive method." He knelt before the door, producing a small leather case from his pocket. From it, he extracted a set of delicate tools lockpicks, their tips gleaming like surgical instruments. The guests watched in silence, their breaths held as Poirot worked, with the precision of a watchmaker. The lock clicked, resisted, clicked again. After a moment, he sat back, his brow furrowed. "It is as I thought," he said. "The lock is held from within. A chair, perhaps, or some other object wedged against the door. We have no choice but to force it." Colonel Hargreaves needed no further invitation. With a grunt, he threw his shoulder against the door, the wood groaning under the impact. On the third try, the lock splintered, and the door swung inward, revealing the study in all its shadowy grandeur. The room was a testament to spurn wealth, mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound tomes, a crystal chandelier glinting faintly in the storm's muted light, and a massive desk dominating the center. But it was the desk that drew every eye. There, glinting malevolently in a pool of candlelight, lay the sapphire-crusted dagger, its blade streaked with fresh blood. The air grew thick with gasps and murmurs, but Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the absence of a body. No one. Dr. Strathmore whispered, her voice barely audible. The blood. But where's the victim? Poirot stepped forward, his patent leather shoes silent on the Persian rug. Kay examined the dagger without touching it, noting the intricate engravings on its hilt, the deep blue of the sapphires catching the light like frozen tears. The blood is fresh, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority. Yet there is no body. This is most intriguing. The dagger, it was missing yesterday. And now it reappears, stained, in a locked room. This is no coincidence. Lady Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. You're saying someone was attacked? I hear. Poirot's gaze flicked to her, then to the others. I say, only what I see, madame, a dagger, blood, a locked room. Kay, but no victim. This suggests either the victim has left, or, Kay paused, his eyes narrowing, or the scene is staged to mislead us. Staged. Colonel Hargreaves barked, his voice booming in the confined space. What kind of nonsense is this? If there's blood, there's a crime. Someone's been hurt, or worse, perhaps. Poirot said, his tone measured. But we must not leap to conclusions. The blood, it is fresh, yet there is no trail leading from the desk. If someone was wounded, where did they go? And why leave the dagger behind? Mrs. Dunworth, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes glinting with an intensity that made Poirot pause. The dagger, she said, her voice low and rasping. It carries the curse of the Ashburns. Blood calls to blood. This is no ordinary crime. Poirot's mustache twitched, but he did not dismiss her words outright. A curse, madame, or a clever distraction. We shall see. He turned to the desk, his fingers hovering over the dagger, but not touching it. His eyes scanned the room, landing on a bookshelf that seemed slightly askew, its edge not flush with the wall. Monsieur Ashburn, this bookshelf, does it conceal anything? Lord Ashburn blinked, his face pale. Conceal? No, it's just a bookshelf. My father had it built decades ago. It's heavy, immovable. Poirot approached the shelf, his fingers tracing the edge where wood met stone. He pressed gently, then, with more force, and with a soft click, the shelf shifted, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in darkness. A collective gasp rose from the guests, and Dr. Strathmore took an involuntary step back. A hidden passage, Poirot said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. This explains much. The locked door, the absence of a body, someone entered or left through here. But who? Lady Beatrice demanded, her voice sharp with fear, or perhaps something else. And why? Poirot's eyes gleamed as he turned to the group. That, madam, is what we must discover. But first, we must secure this passage. No one enters or leaves until I have examined it. Colonel Hargreaves bristled. You're not suggesting one of us did this, are you? I was in my room all night, as was everyone else, I presume. Presumptions, Colonel, are the enemies of truth, Poirot said, his voice soft but cutting. We will verify alibis in due time. For now, I must ask you all to remain in the drawing room while I investigate further. Lord Ashburn nodded, his face drawn. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever you need. But the blood, what does it mean? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the passage, peering into its inky depths. The air within was damp, carrying the scent of earth and stone, and something else, something metallic, like blood. He produced a small flashlight from his pocket, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a narrow stone corridor descending into the manor's underbelly. "Dr. Strathmore," Poirot said, turning to the nervous woman, "you are a physician. Tell me, what do you make of this blood? Is it human? Animal?" Dr. Strathmore hesitated, her eyes darting to the dagger. I need to examine it closely, but it looks human. It's the color, the consistency. It's fresh, as you said." "And you, Monsieur," Poirot said, turning to Lord Ashburn, "this passage, was it known to you?" Lord Ashburn shook his head, his voice unsteady. "I swear, I had no idea. My father never mentioned it. This manor is old, full of secrets. Perhaps he built it for storage, or safety, or escape," Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Very well, I will explore this passage. Colonel, you will assist me in sealing it temporarily. The rest of you, to the drawing room. Mrs. Dunworth, ensure no one leaves." The housekeeper nodded, her expression unreadable. As the guests filed out, Poirot caught Dr. Strathmore lingering, her eyes fixed on the passage. "Something troubles you, Doctor?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. She started, then shook her head. "No, it's just this place. It feels wrong, that passage. I've read about such things in old houses, but to see one—" She trailed off, her hands twisting together. Poirot watched her closely, noting the tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes avoided his. "Mercy. Doctor, please join the others." As the group departed, Poirot and Colonel Hargreaves dragged a heavy armoire to block the passage's entrance, ensuring no one could use it unnoticed. The colonel muttered under his breath about damned theatrics, but Poirot ignored him, his mind already mapping the next steps. The drawing room, when Poirot rejoined the guests, was a cauldron of tension. Lady Beatrice sat rigidly on a velvet settee, her fingers drumming an impatient rhythm. Dr. Strathmore stood by the fire, her gaze distant, while Lord Ashburn paced it, his hands clasped behind his back. Mrs. Dunworth hovered near the door, her keys jangling softly. Only the colonel seemed at ease, pouring himself a generous glass of brandy from a decanter. "Well, Poirot," the colonel said, swirling his drink, "what's your verdict?" "Some madman running about with a bloody dagger." Poirot smiled faintly, settling into an armchair with the grace of a cat. "A madman, perhaps, or a very clever one. Let us consider the facts. The dagger, missing yesterday, now reappears with blood. The room, locked from within. The passage, hidden but used. Someone wishes us to believe a crime has occurred, yet there is no victim. This suggests a warning or a deception." "A deception." Lady Beatrice's voice was sharp. "You think this is some kind of game?" "Not a game, madame," Poirot said, his eyes locking onto hers. "A plan. Someone in this house has a purpose, and the dagger is its symbol. I intend to discover what that purpose is." Lord Ashburn stopped pacing, his face ashen. "Monsieur Poirot, you don't think?" "One of us?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "I think, monsieur, that everyone here has secrets. And secrets, when pressed, reveal truths. Let us begin with you, Dr. Strathmore. You seemed unsettled by the passage. Have you knowledge of such things in this manner?" Dr. Strathmore's eyes widened, her hands clenching. "I told you, I've only read about them. I've never been in this house before this week." "I swear it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you, Colonel, you were quick to suggest breaking the door. Did you perhaps know what we would find?" The Colonel's face reddened. "Tea here, Poirot. I'm no skulking villain. I was in my room, as I said. Ask anyone." "Indeed, I shall," Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk. "And you, Lady Beatrice? Your interest in the dagger yesterday was pronounced. Have you seen it before today?" Lady Beatrice's lips parted, then closed. I told you, it's an heirloom. I've seen it in paintings, old family portraits, but I didn't touch it. If that's what you're implying. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. You, Mrs. Dunworth, you speak of curses and blood debts. Do you know more of this dagger's history than you have shared? The housekeeper's eyes met his, steady and unyielding. I know what the manner whispers, Monsieur Poirot. A dagger has taken lives before, so will again, unless the debt is paid. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like dust. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The blood, the passage, the locked door, the guests' reactions. He was certain now the scene in the study was no accident but a carefully crafted tableau, designed to provoke fear and suspicion. But why? To distract from a greater crime, or to set the stage for one. The storm roared outside. Poirot rose, his small frame commanding the room. Mies, Amos, we are in a game of shadows. Someone among us knows more than they admit. I will find them, and I will uncover their purpose. For now, remain here. I must examine the passage further. He left the drawing room, his steps purposeful, but his mind was a storm of its own. The passage was the key, he was certain. It led somewhere, perhaps to answers, perhaps to danger. As he descended into its depths, the beam of his flashlight, cutting through the darkness, he felt the weight of the manor's secrets pressing down. The blood on the dagger was real, but whose? And why stage a crime with no victim? The passage wound deeper, its walls slick with moisture, its air heavy with the scent of earth and something sharper blood, perhaps, or fear. At its end, Poirot found a rusted iron door, slightly ajar. Beyond it lay a small chamber, its floor littered with debris, broken glass, a torn cloth, and a single drop of blood. Glistening in the flashlight's beam, Poirot knelt, his fingers brushing the cloth. It was silk, fine, like something Lady Beatrice might wear. But the blood, it was too deliberate, too perfectly placed. He straightened, his mind racing. The chamber was a dead end, but it told a story. Someone had been here recently, and they had wanted him to find this. Returning to the study, Poirot sealed the passage with the armoire, ensuring no one could access it without his knowledge. He rejoined the guests, his expression serene, but his eyes alight with purpose. The passage leads to a chamber, he announced, watching their reactions. It's a place of secrets, perhaps of crimes. I have sealed it for now, but it has told me much. The blood on the dagger, it is a message. Someone wishes us to fear, to accuse one another. But I, Hercule Poirot, will not be swayed by fear. The guests exchanged glances, their faces a mix of relief and dread. Poirot's gaze lingered on Dr. Strathmore, whose hands trembled as she clutched her teacup. Doctor, he said softly, you know more of this passage than you claim. Do not deny it. Her cup clattered to the saucer, her face paling. I don't know what you mean, she stammered. Poirot smiled, but it was a smile that promised answers. We shall see. Doctor, we shall see. Chapter 5. The Ghost of Guilt. The wind howled outside Ashburn Manor, its mournful wail weaving through the ancient stone walls, as though the Moors themselves were lamenting the secrets buried within. The storm had grown fiercer, rattling the tall, arched windows of the drawing room where the guests sat in uneasy silence. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, observed the group with his characteristic precision. The flickering flames cast long shadows across their faces, each one a mask of guarded thoughts and unspoken fears. The air was thick with suspicion, and Poirot's sharp eyes darted from one guest to another, noting every twitch, every glance, every subtle shift in posture. Lord Reginald Ashburn sat at the head of the room, his aristocratic features taut, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. To his left, Lady Beatrice, the sharp-tongued heiress, sipped her tea with an air of defiance, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The retired Colonel Harwood, his weathered face etched with a scowl, stared into the fire as if it held answers to questions he dared not voice. Dr. Mortimer, the nervous physician, fidgeted with his spectacles, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted them for the third time in as many minutes. And then there was Mrs. Grimsby, the cryptic housekeeper, who hovered at the edges of the room, a gaunt figure blending into the shadows as she cleared away empty cups with deliberate slowness. The talk of a ghostly figure had begun to spread among the guests. A rumor seeded by Mrs. Grimsby's earlier muttering about a spectral woman who haunted the manor's halls. It was nonsense. Of course, Poirot dismissed such superstitions outright, but he recognized the power of fear to loosen tongues and reveal truths. The housekeeper's tales had stirred the group into a state of restless agitation, and Poirot intended to use that to his advantage. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, cutting through the low hum of the storm. "This talk of ghosts, it is most intriguing, Nan, but Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in spirits that wander the night. No, it is the living who cast the longest shadows, and it is their secrets we must uncover," Lady Beatrice said, her teacup down with a sharp clink. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, must we indulge this nonsense? Ghosts and curses, it's all rather tiresome. I'd rather discuss something sensible, like who stole that wretched dagger." Her tone was imperious, but Poirot noted the slight quiver in her voice, the way her fingers tightened around the delicate handle of her cup. She was rattled, and he intended to find out why. "Perhaps," Madame Poirot replied smoothly. "Talk of ghosts is not so far removed from the dagger's disappearance. Both, they stir the imagination, Nan, and both, they point to something hidden, something one of you wishes to keep buried." The Colonel snorted, crossing his arms. "Poppycock, this is a house, not a theater for ghost stories. If you want to talk about secrets, start with that doctor over there. It's been jittery as a cat in a rainstorm since we arrived." Dr. Mortimer's head snapped up, his spectacles slipping down his nose. I beg your pardon, Colonel. I've done nothing to warrant such accusations. I'm merely concerned for our safety. That's all. Concerned." Lady Beatrice arched an eyebrow, her voice dripping with disdain. "You've been clutching that medical bag of yours like it's a lifeline. What are you hiding in there, Doctor?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Patience, s'il vous plaît. We will uncover all in good time. For now, let us consider this. Ghost, Madame Grimsby, you have spoken of a spectral woman. Tell us, what is it you have seen?" The housekeeper stiffened, her bony hands pausing over a tray of biscuits. Eyes, dark and deep-set, darted toward Lord Ashburn before settling on Poirot. "I've seen what I've seen, sir," she said, her voice low and measured. "A woman in white, gliding through the corridors at night. It's her face. It's sorrowful, like she's carrying a burden from beyond the grave. She's tied to this house, to its sins." Lord Ashburn shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mrs. Grimsby, that's quite enough. You'll frighten the guests with your tales. Frighten us." Lady Beatrice laughed, though it was a brittle sound. "I'm not some simpering child, Reginald, but I must say, your housekeeper's imagination is rather vivid. Caps, she's been reading too many Gothic novels." Mrs. Grimsby's lips tightened, but she said nothing, returning to her task with a quiet intensity that Poirot found telling. He made a mental note. The housekeeper knew more than she was letting on. And her loyalty to the Ashburn family was a thread he would need to unravel. As the evening wore on, the guests dispersed to their rooms, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls of the manor. Poirot remained in the drawing room, his mind turning over the fragments of information he had gathered. The sapphire dagger, the hidden note in his room, the torn journal page. And now, this talk of a ghosted was a puzzle, and every piece was beginning to form a picture, though it was still shrouded in shadow. He rose, adjusting his perfectly tailored coat, and decided to take a walk through the manor's corridors. The storm had made the air damp and heavy, and the old house creaked under its weight as he passed a tall window. Lightning illuminated the moors outside, casting jagged shadows across the floor. It was then that he heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the rustle of silk. Poirot froze, his senses alert. The sound came again from the direction of the grand staircase. He moved silently, his polished shoes barely making a sound on the polished wood floor. At the base of the staircase, he saw a flicker of movement, glimpse of white fabric disappearing around a corner. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his curiosity piqued. He followed, his steps measured, his eyes scanning the dimly lit hall. The manor was a labyrinth of corridors and hidden alcoves, and Poirot's keen mind catalogued every detail as he moved. The sound led him to the library, its heavy oak doors slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and polished wood. The fire in the hearth had died down to embers, casting a faint glow across the room. Poirot's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw her figure, in a white shawl, standing near a bookshelf, her back to him. It was not a ghost, of course, but a woman, her posture tense, her hands moving quickly, as if searching for something. "Madame," Poirot said softly, his voice cutting through the silence. The figure spun around, and Poirot found himself face to face with Lady Beatrice. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something that looked suspiciously like guilt. In her hands, she clutched a small, ornate locket, its gold surface glinting in the firelight. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, her voice a mix of surprise and indignation. "What are you doing, skulking about in the dark?" "It is not I who skulks," Madame Poirot replied, his tone mild but pointed. "It is you, I think, who searches for something in the dead of night. May I ask what you have found?" Lady Beatrice's grip tightened on the locket, and for a moment Poirot thought she might deny everything. But then her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky breath. It's nothing. It's just a trinket I misplaced years ago. It might be here, in the library." Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "A trinket, you say? Yet you search for it in the dark, in a room not your own, when the house is filled with talk of ghosts and murder. Forgive me, madame, but Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily convinced." Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed with defiance, but there was a tremor in her voice as she spoke. "You're insufferable, Monsieur Poirot. Very well, if you must know, this locket belonged to someone dear to me. I lost it years ago during a visit to this wretched place. I only wanted to find it, to remember." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the locket. "May I see it, s'il vous plaît?" Reluctantly, she handed it over. Poirot opened the locket with a delicate touch, revealing a miniature portrait of a young man with striking features, high cheekbones, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet intensity. The resemblance to Lord Ashburn was unmistakable, yet there was something softer, more vulnerable in this face. "This is Edward Ashburn, is it not?" Poirot asked, his voice gentle but probing. "Lord Reginald's late brother." Lady Beatrice's breath caught, and she turned away, her hands clenching into fists. "Yes," she whispered. "Edward. We were engaged once, before he died." Poirot closed the locket and handed it back to her, his mind racing. The housekeeper's description of the ghost had been vivid, a woman in white, sorrowful, tied to the manor sins. And now, here was Lady Beatrice, clutching a locket with Edward Ashburn's portrait, searching the library in secret. The pieces were beginning to align, but the picture was still incomplete. "Madame," Poirot said, his tone softening, "you must tell me the truth. What happened to Edward Ashburn's death? It weighs heavily on you, does it not?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, her jaw tightening. "It was an accident," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A terrible accident. We were young, foolish. Edward, he loved the moors, loved riding out in the early morning. One day, he didn't come back. Ha! They found him at the bottom of a ravine, his horse spooked, his neck broken. I was supposed to meet him that morning, but I was delayed. If I had been there, perhaps—" Her voice broke, and Poirot allowed her a moment to compose herself. For a moment, it seemed as though Lady Beatrice would crumble. Her lips parted, and her eyes filled with tears. But then she straightened, her defiance returning. "I fear nothing, Monsieur Poirot, nothing at all." She turned and fled the room, leaving the guests in stunned silence. Poirot watched her go, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place: Edward Ashburn's death, the sapphire dagger, the woman in white. Lady Beatrice was at the center of it all, but whether she was victim or villain, he could not yet say. As the day wore on, Poirot continued his investigation, interviewing each guest in turn. The colonel was gruff, but forthcoming, admitting to a long-standing grudge against the Ashburn family, but denying any involvement in the current plot. Dr. Mortimer was evasive, his answers laced with nervous laughter, but he offered no new insights. Lord Ashburn, meanwhile, seemed increasingly withdrawn, his aristocratic composure fraying at the edges. It was Mrs. Grimsby who provided the final clue. Poirot found her in the kitchen, kneading dough with a ferocity that belied her frail appearance. "Madame Grimsby," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "you know more about this house than anyone. The woman in white, the journal, the dagger, what is the truth you are hiding?" The housekeeper's hand stilled, and she met his gaze with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "You're a clever man, Monsieur Poirot," she said, "but you're meddling in things that don't concern you. The Ashburns have blood on their hands, and the woman in white is their reckoning. That's all you need to know. And Lady Beatrice," Poirot pressed, "she is the woman in white, is she not? Her guilt, it haunts this house as surely as any ghost." Mrs. Grimsby's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Poirot nodded, satisfied that he had struck a nerve. He left the kitchen, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The day was drawing to a close, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. The manor was a tinderbox, and Poirot knew that the killer would strike soon as night fell. Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room once more, determined to provoke a reaction. "Mes amis," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "the time for secrets is over. The woman in white, she is no ghost, but a symbol of guilt that binds you all to this house. Tonight, Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth, and the killer will be revealed." The room erupted in protests, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "We begin with Lady Beatrice," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Madame, you will tell us the truth about Edward Ashburn's death." Now, Lady Beatrice's face strained of color, and for a moment it seemed as though she might faint. But then she straightened, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "I'll tell you everything." And so, as the storm raged outside, Lady Beatrice began to speak, her words unraveling a tale of love, betrayal, and a death that had haunted her for years. Edward Ashburn, she revealed, had been her fiancé, a man of passion and principle who had uncovered a dark secret about his family's wealth. He had confronted his father, threatening to expose the truth, and it had cost him his life. I didn't kill him, Lady Beatrice said, her voice breaking. But I didn't save him either. I was supposed to meet him that morning to help him gather evidence, but I was delayed, and by the time I reached the moors, he was gone. I've carried that guilt ever since. Poirot listened in silence, his mind piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle. Edward Ashburn's death was the key, and Lady Beatrice's guilt was the thread that tied it all together. But there was still one piece missing. The identity of the mastermind behind the current plot. As Lady Beatrice finished her story, a sudden crash of thunder shook the manor, and the lights flickered. In that moment, Poirot felt a surge of certainty. The killer was close, and the truth was within his grasp. He had seen grief before, but this was more than grief, was guilt, sharp and jagged, cutting through her carefully constructed facade. You blame yourself? Poirot said quietly. But there is more, is there not? Something you have not told me. Lady Beatrice shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. There's nothing more to tell. Edward died, and I've carried that pain ever since. This locket is all I have left of him. I only want to find it, to hold on to. Something of his. Poirot studied her, his little gray cells working furiously. She was telling the truth, but not the whole truth. The locket, the library, her presence here in the dead of night, it all pointed to a deeper connection to the manor's secrets. And then there was the housekeeper's story, the ghostly woman who matched Lady Beatrice's description too closely to be coincidence. Very well, Madame, Poirot said at last. But I must warn you the truth. It has a way of coming to light. In Hercule Poirot, he will find it, with or without your help. Lady Beatrice said nothing, clutching the locket to her chest as she brushed past him and disappeared into the darkened corridor. Poirot remained in the library, his mind turning over the new information. Edward Ashburn's death was no mere accident. He was certain of it. And Lady Beatrice's guilt, whether justified or not, was a thread that led directly to the heart of the mystery. The next morning, the storm showed no signs of abating, and the manor felt more like a prison than a home. The guests gathered for breakfast in the dining room, their faces drawn and weary. The talk of the ghost had spread, and the atmosphere was thick with unease. Mrs. Grimsby moved silently among them, serving tea and toast with her usual efficiency. But Poirot noticed her eyes lingering on Lady Beatrice, who sat, pale and silent, at the far end of the table. Reginald, the colonel said gruffly, breaking the silence. This ghost nonsense has gone far enough. Your housekeeper stories are upsetting everyone. Can't you control your staff? Lord Ashburn's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Mrs. Grimsby spoke, her voice sharp and unyielding. I speak what I see, Colonel. This house has its secrets, and they won't stay buried forever. The woman in white, she's real, and she's angry. The room fell silent, the only sound the howling wind outside. Dr. Mortimer coughed nervously, his hands fidgeting with his napkin. Surely, Mrs. Grimsby, you don't truly believe in ghosts? There must be a rational explanation. Rational? Mrs. Grimsby's eyes narrowed. You of all people should know that not everything in this house is as it seems, Doctor. Poirot leaned forward, his interest piqued. What, Madame Grimsby, do you mean by that? The housekeeper hesitated, her gaze flickering to Lord Ashburn. I only mean, this house has a history. People have died here, and not all of them by accident. The woman in white, she's tied to that history. She's a warning. A warning of what? Lady Beatrice snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. This is absurd, scaring everyone with your fairy tales. Mrs. Grimsby's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. Fairy tales, my lady. Haps, but the truth has a way of haunting us, whether we believe in it or not. Poirot watched the exchange closely, noting the undercurrents of hostility and fear. The housekeeper's words were deliberate, designed to provoke, and they had struck a nerve. He decided it was time to push further. "Madame Grimsby," he said, his tone measured, "you speak of a woman in white, sorrowful, tied to the sins of this house. Can you describe her more precisely? Her face, her dress, her manner?" Mrs. Grimsby's hand stilled, and for a moment she seemed to weigh her words carefully. "She's young, or was once. Her hair is dark, fallen loose about her shoulders. Her dress is simple, white, like a shroud, and her eyes, they're full of pain, like she's lost something she can never get back." Poirot's mind flashed to the locket, to the portrait of Edward Ashburn. The description was too close. To Lady Beatrice's appearance, her dark hair, her elegant but simple attire. But there was something else, something Mrs. Grimsby wasn't saying. He resolved to confront her later, away from the prying eyes of the other guests. The breakfast ended in strained silence, and Poirot excused himself to continue his investigation. He returned to the library, determined to search the shelves where Lady Beatrice had been the previous night. The room was as he had left it, the embers in the hearth now cold. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books, searching for anything out of place. It was then that he found it, a small, leather-bound volume tucked behind a row of larger tomes. The book was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, and on the cover was embossed the Ashburn family crest. Poirot opened it carefully, revealing a series of handwritten entries, a journal, perhaps, or a family record. The pages were filled with accounts of the manor's history, its triumphs and tragedies, but one entry caught his eye. "The debt must be paid," it read, in a spidery hand. "K. The sapphire dagger, taken in blood, will bring ruin to the Ashburns." Edward knew, and he suffered for it. "The woman in white will not rest until justice is done." Poirot's pulse quickened. The words echoed the torn journal page he had found in the housekeeper's hands. "Tess," and they confirmed his suspicions. Edward Ashburn's death was no accident, and the sapphire dagger was at the heart of it. The woman in white, whether ghost or metaphor, was a symbol of guilt, and Lady Beatrice was inextricably linked to it. He slipped the book into his pocket, determined to confront Lady Beatrice once more. But as he left the library, he heard a commotion from the drawing-room, a shout, followed by the sound of breaking glass. He hurried toward the noise, his heart pounding with the certainty that the killer was growing bolder in the drawing-room. He found the guests gathered around a shattered vase, its fragments scattered across the floor. Lady Beatrice stood in the center, her face ashen, her hands trembling. It fell," she stammered. "I didn't mean to." "Nonsense," the colonel barked. "You threw it. I saw you, Beatrice. You're unraveling, and it's about time we all knew why." Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Enough, Colonel. Madame Beatrice, you will explain yourself. It has caused this distress." Lady Beatrice's eyes darted to the locket, still clutched in her hand. "It's nothing," she said, her voice shaking. I was startled. That's all. It's a storm. The talk of ghosts, it's too much." Poirot's gaze softened, but his resolve did not waver. "Madame, you cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. The locket, the library, the vasties are not accidents. They are signs of a heart burdened by guilt. Tell me, what is it you fear?" Chapter 6. The colonel's secret. The storm that battered Ashburn Manor had not relented, its howling winds rattling the ancient windows as if the very moor sought to invade the house. Hercule Poirot, seated in the dim glow of the drawing-room, sipped his tisane, his sharp eyes flitting between the guests. The air was thick with suspicion, each glance a silent accusation, each word a potential snare. The sapphire-encrusted dagger missing and then mysteriously reappearing in Lord Ashburn's locked study to cast a shadow over the manor, its blood-stained blade a mute testament to a crime yet uncommitted, or so it seemed. Poirot's mind, however, was not idle. His little gray cells churned, piecing together the fragments of motive and opportunity that danced in the manor's oppressive atmosphere. The Colonel, Reginald Haverford, sat rigidly by the fireplace, his weathered hands gripping the arms of his chair. His gruff demeanor, a shield of military stoicism, had begun to crack under Poirot's relentless observation. The man's eyes, once steely, now darted nervously, betraying a secret he could no longer conceal. Poirot had noted the Colonel's disdain for Lady Beatrice, his curt dismissals of the doctor, and his peculiar deference to Lord Ashburn, as if bound by an unspoken debt. The detective's instincts told him the Colonel was a pivot in this mystery, a man whose past held the key to the manor's present unease. "Mon Colonel Poirot," began, his voice smooth as velvet, cutting through the room's tension. "You have spoken little this evening, yet your silence, it speaks volumes. Perhaps you would share with Hercule Poirot what troubles you so." The Colonel's jaw tightened, his mustache twitching as he met Poirot's gaze. "Nothing troubles me, sir," he replied gruffly, his tone betraying the lie. "Just weary of this damn storm and all this talk of curses and daggers. Poppycock, if you ask me." "Poppycock, you say?" Poirot tilted his head, his mustache curling slightly with a knowing smile. "Yet you grip your chair as if it were the last bastion of your composure. Allure, let us be frank. The sapphire dagger, it is no mere trinket. Its history, it binds you to this house, does it not?" The room fell silent. The other guests, Lady Beatrice, Dr. Clarence Whitmore, and the cryptic housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby, turning their attention to the exchange. Lord Ashburn, standing by the mantel, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. His aristocratic calm a stark contrast to the Colonel's unease. "I don't know what you're getting at, Poirot," the Colonel snapped, though his voice wavered. "I'm here because Ashburn invited me, same as the rest of you. Nothing more to it, Fremont." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "Then why, mon ami, do I see in your face this shadow of guilt? A guilt that dates back, perhaps, to the war, to a time when you and Lord Ashburn's father, the late Viscount, shared a history that was not, shall we say, entirely honorable." The Colonel's face paled, his knuckles whitening on the chair. Lady Beatrice gasped softly, her hand fluttering to her throat, while Dr. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably, his fingers fidgeting with his spectacles. Mrs. Grimsby, standing in the corner, muttered something under her breath, her eyes darkened unreadable. "You've no right to pry into my past," the Colonel growled, but his voice lacked conviction. "What's done is done. The war was a brutal time, and I did what I had to." "We, being, sir, you did what you had to," Poirot said, his tone deceptively gentle. "But what you did, it has followed you here, to this manor, to this very moment. The sapphire dagger, it was not always in the Ashburn family, was it? It was taken looted, perhaps during a time of chaos. And you, Colonel Haverford, you were there when it was taken, were you not?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Lord Ashburn's expression hardened, his fingers tightening around his glass of brandy. "Poirot," he said, his voice low, "you tread on dangerous ground. My father's actions during the war are not on trial here." "Pardon moi, Lord Ashburn," Poirot replied, his eyes never leaving the Colonel. "But it is not your father I question now. It is the Colonel who carries the weight of a betrayal that has shaped this house's dark legacy. Nest CPA, Colonel." The Colonel rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked. "I'll not be interrogated like some common criminal in my friend's home." "Sit down, Reginald," Lord Ashburn said sharply, his authority cutting through the tension. "If you've nothing to hide, let Poirot have his say. We're all under scrutiny here." The Colonel hesitated, his chest heaving, then sank back into his chair, his defiance crumbling. Poirot nodded, satisfied, and continued. Mercy, Lord Ashburn. Now, Colonel, let us speak of the massacre at Villeron, 1917, a small village in France. Yes, it's a place where you and the late Viscount Ashburn served together. It's a place where a terrible decision was made, a decision that enriched his family, but at a cost. The sapphire dagger, it was taken from a French nobleman, was it not? A man who trusted you, who believed you would protect his family's treasures. Instead, you betrayed him, and his blood stained the earth. The colonel's face contorted, a mix of rage and shame. You don't know what it was like, he said hoarsely. The war, it broke men. We were starving, desperate. The Viscount, he saw a chance to secure his family's future. I followed orders, that's all. Orders. Poirot's voice was sharp now, cutting like a blade, to slaughter innocents. To steal what was not yours. The dagger, it was no mere spoil of war. It was a symbol of trust, broken by your hand. And now, here, in this manner, that betrayal haunts you. The missing dagger, the blood in the studies, someone seeks to remind you of Villeron, do they not? The colonel's hands trembled, his eyes darting to Lord Ashburn, who remained impassive. I didn't take the dagger, he muttered. I swear it. Haven't seen it since the war. Yet it reappeared, Poirot said, his voice softening but no less piercing. And with blood upon it. Someone knows your secret, Colonel. Someone wishes to see you pay. Before the colonel could respond, a deafening crack of thunder shook the manor, followed by a sudden, blinding darkness as every light in the room flickered and died. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. The guests' silhouettes barely visible in the faint glow of the fire. Stay calm, everyone, Lord Ashburn called, his voice steady. Mrs. Grimsby fetched the candles. But before the housekeeper could move, a sharp, unmistakable sound shattered the silence, a gunshot echoing from somewhere in the manor steps. Lady Beatrice screamed, and Dr. Whitmore leapt to his feet, knocking over his chair. Poirot, ever composed, rose swiftly, his hand already reaching for the small flashlight he carried in his pocket. Restez AVO8, he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. No one moves until we know what has happened. The beam of his flashlight swept the room, illuminating pale, frightened faces. The colonel, however, was not among them. His chair was empty, the door to the hallway ajar. Monsieur, Poirot muttered, his mind racing. Quickly, we must find him. Led by Poirot's flashlight, the group hurried into the hallway, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The storm's roar seemed to mock their urgency, lightning flashing through the tall windows, casting eerie shadows. They followed the sound's origin to the library, where the door stood open. A cold draft seeping from within. Inside, the colonel knelt on the floor, his face ashen, his hands clutching his chest. It wasn't me, he gasped, his voice barely audible. Someone fired at me. Poirot knelt beside him, his flashlight sweeping the room. The library was in disarray, books scattered across the floor, a chair overturned. On the far wall, a bullet hole marred the wood paneling, the splintered edges fresh and raw. Courage, mon colonel, Poirot said, his tone calm but urgent. You are unharmed, yes? Tell me what happened. The colonel's breath came in ragged gasps. I came here, to clear my head. The darkness fell, and then I heard the shot. It missed me by inches. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he examined the bullet hole, his fingers tracing the trajectory. Interesting, he murmured. The shot came from the doorway. N'est-ce pas? Yet we were all in the drawing room when the lights failed. Cool, then, could have fired. He turned to the group, his flashlight casting stark shadows across their faces. Lady Beatrice clutched her shawl, her eyes wide with fear. Dr. Whitmore's hands shook as he adjusted his spectacles, his gaze flickering to the floor. Mrs. Grimsby stood apart, her expression unreadable, while Lord Ashburn's face was a mask of controlled concern. "Someone," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate, "has played a dangerous game. But Hercule Poirot does not believe in accidents. This shot was meant to frighten or, perhaps, to kill. We must find the weapon." A thorough search of the library revealed nothing at first, but Poirot's meticulous eye caught a glint beneath a fallen book. He retrieved a revolver, its barrel still warm, and held it up for all to see. "Voila," he said, his tone grim. "A Webley standard issue for British officers during the war. Kano, you are familiar with such a weapon, are you not?" The colonel's eyes widened, his face draining of color. That's my," he stammered. "But I didn't fire it. Swear, it was in my room, locked in my case." "Locked, you say?" Poirot's mustache twitched with skepticism. "Yet here it is, in the library, with a bullet freshly fired. Curio, no? Someone has gone to great lengths to make you appear guilty, Colonel. Or, perhaps, you seek to make us believe you are the victim." The accusation hung in the air, heavy as the storm outside. The colonel's mouth opened, but no words came. The other guests exchanged uneasy glances, their trust in one another fraying further. "Mies, Amos," Poirot said, addressing the group, "this incident is no isolated act. The dagger, the note, the blood, and now this gunshot, there are threads in a tapestry of deceit. Someone among us weaves this web, and Hercule Poirot will unravel it." He turned to the colonel, his gaze piercing. "For now, mon colonel, your weapon will remain in my possession. I suggest you retire to your roomette. Lock your door. The night is not yet done with its surprises." As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered in the library, his flashlight sweeping the room once more. His mind replayed the colonel's confession, the betrayal at Villeron, the stolen dagger. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture remained incomplete. The gunshot, he was certain, was no random act. It was a performance, staged to deflect suspicion or to draw it. But whose hand had pulled the trigger? The colonel, to play the victim, or another, to cast him as the villain? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft creak from the hallway. He turned, his flashlight catching a fleeting shadow disappearing around the corner. He followed, his steps silent, his senses alert. The shadow led him to the grand staircase, where a faint rustle of fabric betrayed the presence of another. He paused, his light revealing Mrs. Grimsby, her face pale in the beam. "Madame Grimsby," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm, "you wander the halls at a curious hour. Have you, perhaps, something to tell Hercule Poirot?" The housekeeper's eyes flickered with something fear, perhaps, or defiance. "I heard the shot," she said, her voice low. I thought it was the curse, come to claim another." "The curse," Poirot repeated, his tone dry. "Toujours this curse. Yet I suspect, madame, that the true danger lies not in spirits, but in the living. You know more than you say, do you not?" Mrs. Grimsby's lips tightened, but she said nothing, turning away and vanishing into the shadows. Poirot watched her go, his mind racing. The housekeeper's cryptic warnings, the colonel's secret, the dagger's reappearance were linked, he was certain. But the final piece, the motive that bound them, remained just out of reach. He returned to his room, locking the door. Behind him, the revolver, now safely in his possession, lay on the table, its weight a reminder of the danger that stalked Ashburn Manor. Poirot sat at the desk, his notebook open, and began to sketch a new mental map. One that included the colonel's betrayal, the gunshot, and the shadow in the hall. The tapestry was growing clearer, but its darkest threads were yet to be revealed. The storm raged on, and Poirot knew the night would bring more revelations. For now, he was satisfied. He had shaken the colonel, seized the weapon, and planted the seeds of doubt among the guests. The killer, whoever they were, would make their next move soon, and Hercule Poirot would be waiting. Chapter 7. The Doctor's Dilemma. The storm outside Ashburn Manor raged with unrelenting fury, its howling winds rattling the ancient windows and casting eerie shadows across the dimly lit dining room. The guests sat around the long mahogany table, their faces taut with unease, the air thick with suspicion. Hercule Poirot, seated at one end, sipped his tisane, his sharp eyes darting from one guest to another, cataloging every nervous twitch, every fleeting glance. The events of the past days, the missing sapphire dagger, the cryptic journal page, the colonel's staged attack, had woven a tapestry of deceit that Poirot was determined to unravel. Tonight, his focus had settled on Dr. Ernest Whitlock, whose erratic behavior had grown impossible to ignore. The doctor, a wiry man with thinning hair and spectacles that seemed perpetually askew, sat hunched over his plate, his fork scraping aimlessly against the porcelain. His hands trembled slightly, a detail Poirot noted with interest. Across from him, Lady Beatrice, the sharp-tongued heiress, cast a withering glance, her lips pursed as if restraining a barb. Colonel Grayson, his face ruddy from the evening's wine, muttered something about the damnable weather, while the housekeeper, Mrs. Clara Wren, glided silently around the table, refilling glasses with a demeanor that suggested she was privy to secrets none of them could fathom. Lord Ashburn, their host, presided at the head of the table, his aristocratic features composed but his eyes betraying a flicker of unease. Poirot set down his cup, the delicate clink drawing the room's attention. "Mies, Amos," he began, his voice calm yet commanding. "It is clear that the events in this manor are not mere accidents. The disappearance of the sapphire dagger, the warnings, the gunshot in the night, these are threads in a carefully woven plot. And I, Hercule Poirot, intend to find the hand that holds the needle." A murmur rippled through the group. Lady Beatrice scoffed, tossing her auburn curls. "You speak of plots, Monsieur Poirot, but what proof do you have? We're all trapped here, jumping at shadows. Perhaps it's this wretched house playing tricks on us." "Tricks?" Madame Poirot's mustache twitched. "None, none. The mind of Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived. There is purpose here, and I sense it most strongly in the actions of one among us." His gaze settled on Dr. Whitlock, who froze, his fork clattering to the plate. "Me," the doctor stammered, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "Done nothing but try to keep everyone calm." "This is preposterous, is it?" Poirot tilted his head, his tone deceptively mild. "You have been most anxious, Doctor. Your hands tremble, your eyes avoid mine, and last night, when the colonel's revolver discharged, you were nowhere to be found. Perhaps you would care to explain." The room fell silent, save for the storm's distant rumble. All eyes turned to Whitlock, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. I was in my room," he said, his voice cracking. "Heard the shot, and stayed put. Surely that's not a crime." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "And yet, Doctor, I have observed you. Your medical bag, which you guard so closely, perhaps it contains more than bandages and tonics. Shall we inspect it?" Whitlock's face paled, and he clutched the leather satchel at his side. "This is outrageous. I'm a physician, not a criminal." Lord Ashburn raised a hand, his voice steady but strained. "Monsieur Poirot, surely we can resolve this without accusations. Dr. Whitlock has been a trusted friend for years." "Trusted, perhaps," Poirot replied, "but even the most trusted may harbor secrets. I propose we adjourn to the library." where we may discuss this matter with clarity, where the doctor might feel inclined to share what he knows." The group rose reluctantly, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall as they followed Poirot to the library. The room was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound books, its air heavy with the scent of aged paper and wax. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the shelves. Mrs. Wren lingered at the door, eyes darting nervously, while the others took seats in a semicircle around Poirot, who stood before the fireplace like a conductor, preparing to lead an orchestra of truths. "Dr. Whitlock," Poirot began, "let us speak plainly. You were present when Lord Ashburn's brother, Charles, died under mysterious circumstances. You certified his death as an accidental fall from the cliffs, I believe. But I have learned from my inquiries that the circumstances were not so clear. Perhaps you would care to enlighten us." The doctor's face contorted, a mix of fear and indignation. "I did my duty. Charles was drunk, reckless. He fell, and I reported what I saw. There's nothing more to it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet you have not been yourself, doctor. Your agitation grows with each passing hour. Tell me, what is in that bag you clutch so tightly? A tool of your trade, or something more sinister?" Whitlock's grip tightened, his knuckles whitening. "This is harassment. I won't stand for it." Before Poirot could press further, a sharp crack interrupted the tension on thunder. But something closer, more deliberate. The guests froze, their eyes darting to the far wall, where a heavy portrait of a stern-faced Ashburn ancestor hung askew. Beneath it, carved into the wood paneling, were words that sent a chill through the room. "The debt must be paid." Lady Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "What in heaven's name?" Colonel Grayson surged to his feet, his voice booming. "This is madness. Someone's playing a cruel game." Poirot, unfazed, approached the carving, his fingers tracing the jagged letters. "This is no game, Colonel. This is a message, and it is meant to provoke fear. But fear will not deter Hercule Poirot." He turned to Whitlock, his voice low and insistent. "Doctor, open your bag now." Whitlock hesitated, his eyes darting to the door as if considering flight. But Poirot's gaze held him like a vice. With trembling hands, he unlatched the satchel and placed it on the table. The guests leaned forward, their curiosity tinged with dread, as Poirot reached inside and withdrew a small glass vial filled with a colorless liquid. "And what is this, doctor?" Poirot held the vial to the light, its contents glinting ominously. "A remedy, or a poison?" Whitlock's voice was barely a whisper. It's just a sedative. For emergencies." Poirot's mustache curled slightly, a sign of his skepticism. "A sedative, you say? Curious, then, that it bears no label, no mark of a chemist. I think, perhaps, it is something more dangerous. Shall we test it?" The doctor's composure shattered. "Huh?" He slumped into his chair, his face buried in his hands. All right. I'll tell you everything. Tia must understand I never meant for anyone to get hurt." The room held its breath as Whitlock began his confession, his voice halting but resolute. "Charles Ashburn's death wasn't an accident. I covered it up. He was poisoned, not drunk. I found him on the cliffs, already dying, with a vial like that one in his hand. I panicked. The Ashburn family, they're powerful, connected. Reginald begged me to call it an accident to avoid scandal. I forged the records, said he fell, but I kept the vial, just in case. In case. I needed to protect myself." "Protect yourself." Poirot's voice was sharp. "From whom?" Whitlock's eyes flickered to Lord Ashburn, who sat rigid, his face a mask of shock. "From him," the doctor whispered. I thought he might have been involved." Charles was a threat to the family's reputation, always stirring up trouble. I suspected Reginald wanted him gone. Lord Ashburn shot to his feet, his voice trembling with outrage. That's a lie. My brother was troubled. Yes, but I loved him. I would never. Enough. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Dr. Whitlock, you speak of poison, yet you carry this vial now. Why? Were you planning to use it? No, Whitlock cried. Kept it as evidence, to protect myself, if the truth came out. But I swear, I haven't used it. I don't know. Who carved that message, or who's behind all this? Poirot studied the doctor, his mind racing. The confession was a breakthrough, but it raised more questions than answers. The vial, the message, the dagger all pointed to a revenge plot, but the mastermind remained elusive. He turned to the group, his voice measured. This vial will be secured in my room under lock and key. No one will touch it until we determine its contents. But note this, the truth is close, and Hercule Poirot will not rest until it is revealed. As the guests dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Poirot lingered in the library, his gaze fixed on the carved message. Mrs. Wren approached, her steps silent as a ghost's. Monsieur Poirot, she murmured, you're stirring up old wounds. Be careful. This house, it does not forgive. Poirot met her gaze, unflinching. Madame, it is not the house that concerns me, but the hearts within it. I assure you, I am most careful. Okay? She nodded, her expression unreadable, and slipped away into the shadows. Alone, Poirot examined the vial once more, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The doctor's confession had exposed a crack in the manor's facade. But the true architect of this dark plot was still hidden. Locked the vial in his suitcase, satisfied that he had thwarted a potential murder attempt. But the weight of the mystery pressed heavier than ever. The storm continued to rage outside, mirroring the turmoil within Ashburn Manor. As Poirot retired to his room, he felt the threads of the case tightening, drawing him closer to the heart of the darkness. The carved message echoed in his mind. The debt must be paid. But whose debt, and who would pay the ultimate price? The night stretched on, the manor groaning under the storm's relentless assault. Poirot sat at the small desk in his room, his notebook open, his pen scratching out a meticulous list of clues. The dagger, the journal page, the colonel's revolver, the poison vial, the carved message. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. He leaned back, his eyes half closed, letting his little gray cells work their magic. A soft knock at the door startled him. It was Lady Beatrice, her face pale, her silk shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, I couldn't sleep. That message in the library, it's about me, isn't it? The debt. It's my fault. Poirot gestured for her to sit, his expression softening, but his mind alert. Madame, explain yourself. What debt do you speak of? She hesitated, her fingers twisting the shawl. Charles, he loved me, but I didn't love him back. Not truly. I was young, ambitious. I wanted the Ashburn name, not the man. When he died, I thought it was my fault. I drove him to despair. Dale, someone knows. Someone wants me to pay. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you believe this someone is in this house? She nodded, tears brimming. I don't know who, but I feel it. It's the dagger, the poison, it's all connected to me. I'm scared, monsieur. Poirot, I don't want to die. Guy placed a reassuring hand on hers, though his mind was already racing. Madame, you will not die while Hercule Poirot is here. But you must tell me everything, every detail of your time with Charles, every secret you've kept. Lady Beatrice's story poured out in a torrent of guilt and fear. She spoke of Charles's reckless passion, his obsession with the sapphire dagger as a symbol of their doomed love. She admitted to rejecting him cruelly, still flaunting her engagement to another man, a wealthy industrialist who promised her the world. Charles had vanished to the cliffs that night, and she had never seen him again. "I didn't know he'd die," she whispered. "I thought he'd just leave." Poirot listened intently, his mind cataloging her words. Her story aligned with the doctor's confession. But it also raised a new possibility. What if Charles's death was not a suicide, but a murder disguised as one? And what if the killer was still among them, using the manor's dark history to exact revenge? "Thank you," Madame Poirot said at last. "Your candor is most helpful. Now, return to your room and lock the door. Trust in Poirot to protect you." She nodded, her face a mixture of relief and dread, and slipped out into the hall. Poirot sat back, his mind buzzing. The doctor's poison, the carved message. Lady Beatrice's guiltol pointed to a vendetta rooted in Charles's death. But who stood to gain? Lord Ashburn, protecting his family's legacy. The Colonel, hiding his wartime betrayal. Or perhaps Mrs. Wren, whose cryptic warnings suggested a deeper connection to the Ashburn curse. As dawn approached, the storm began to abate, its fury giving way to an eerie calm. Poirot stood at his window, watching the first light creep across the moors. He felt a surge of satisfaction. He had uncovered a critical piece of the puzzle. Tonight, the poison vial was safely locked away, and the doctor's confession had exposed a lie that had festered for years. But the true killer remained at large, and Poirot knew the next move would be decisive. He returned to his notebook, adding a final note. The debt is not one of money, but of blood. And the one who demands payment is closer than we think. Chapter 8. The Housekeeper's Truth. The storm outside Ashburn Manor had reached a fever pitch. Its howling winds rattling the ancient windows as if the moor itself were crying out for justice. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion. Each guest casting wary glances at the others, their nerves frayed by the mounting mysteries. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the chaos, stood in the dimly lit corridor outside the library, his sharp eyes fixed on the housekeeper. Mrs. Clara Wren. Her cryptic warnings and intimate knowledge of the manor's secrets had elevated her from a peripheral figure to a linchpin in the unfolding drama. To Poirot, she was no longer merely the keeper of the house, but a keeper of truths he intended to unravel. The morning had begun with a grim discovery. Lady Beatrice, the sharp-tongued heiress, had been found slumped in the dining room, her lips tinged blue, a faint pulse betraying her brush with death. Poirot's quick thinking and a hastily administered antidote procured from the doctor's own medical bag, ironically, had saved her life, but the poison's presence had sent shockwaves through the manor. The vial, hidden in the doctor's possessions, had pointed to him as the culprit, yet Poirot's instincts whispered of a deeper, more intricate plot. The housekeeper, with her whispered tales of curses and her uncanny knack for appearing at pivotal moments, held the key to the next piece of the puzzle. Poirot adjusted his bow tie and approached Mrs. Wren, who was busying herself with polishing a silver candelabra in the hallway. Though her movements seemed more ritualistic than purposeful, her gray hair was pulled tightly into a bun, and her eyes sharp as flint. Could he, with a mix of defiance and fear as she noticed Poirot's approach. "Madame Wren," Poirot began, his voice smooth yet commanding. It is time, I think, for you to share with Hercule Poirot the full measure of your knowledge. The secrets of Ashburn Manor, they weigh heavily upon you, Nan." Mrs. Wren's hands stilled, the cloth pausing mid-motion. She met his gaze, her lips tightening into a thin line. "I've told you enough, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and edged with a Yorkshire burr. "There's naught but trouble in digging up old graves." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a predator sizing up its quarry. Trouble, madame, has already found. U.S. The poison that nearly claimed Lady Beatrice, the sapphire dagger. The journal page torn from its binding. These are not accidents. They are the threads of a tapestry, and you, I suspect, know the pattern. Mrs. Wren set the candelabra down with a deliberate clunk, her hands trembling slightly. You're a clever man, Monsieur Poirot, but cleverness can lead you to dark places. Some truths are better left buried. Nan, Poirot countered, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The truth, it is like the light. It reveals, it cleanses. In Hercule Poirot, he does not fear the dark. Tell me, Madame Wren, who are you to this house? It's not merely a servant, I think. The housekeeper's eyes widened, a flicker of something guilt, perhaps, or recognition crossing her weathered face. For a moment, she seemed poised to flee, but Poirot's presence, calm yet unyielding, held her in place. She drew a deep breath, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of years had finally pressed her down. Very well, she said at last, her voice barely audible over the storm's roar. But not here. The walls of this manor have ears, and they've heard too much already. She led Poirot to a small parlor at the end of the corridor, a room rarely used, its furniture draped in dust sheets like ghosts of forgotten gatherings. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows across the walls, illuminating a faded portrait of a stern-faced woman in Victorian dress, her eyes seeming to follow their every move. Mrs. Wren closed the door behind them and turned to face Poirot, her expression resolute. I am Clara Ashburn, she said, the words falling like stones into a still pond. The illegitimate sister of Lord Ashburn's late mother, Eleanor, born out of wedlock, hidden away like a shameful secret. My mother, a housemaid, was cast out when her condition was discovered, but I was allowed to stay, raised in the shadows of this manor, served the Ashburns my whole life, loyal to a family that never claimed me. Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. The revelation was significant, yet he sensed it was only the beginning. The sapphire dagger, Mrs. Wren went on, her voice growing steadier. It's more than a trinket. It's a curse, Monsieur Poirot, looted by Lord Ashburn's grandfather during a campaign in India. It was taken from a temple, a sacred place. The man who brought it here, Captain Edmund Ashburn, paid a price. His allies, his brothers in arms, turned on him, betrayed him. One of them, a man named Vikram Roe, swore vengeance on the Ashburn line. He spoke of a blood debt, a curse that would follow the family until the dagger was returned or the debt was paid in lives. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the housekeeper's tale to the torn journal page he'd found in the library, its cryptic mention of a blood debt. Add this journal page, he said, producing it from his pocket. Its edges frayed, but the ink still legible. It speaks of this debt, does it not? You hid it to protect this secret? Mrs. Wren's eyes darted to the paper, her face paling. I did, she admitted. I found it in the library years ago, tucked inside an old ledger. I thought if I kept it hidden, the past might stay buried. But someone else found it knew of it. Okay, that's why I left it for you, in your room, as a warning. I hoped you'd leave, take your questions with you. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement, but of satisfaction. A warning, perhaps, but also a clue. You wished for Hercule Poirot to see the truth, even if you feared it. Tell me, Madame Rincleroux, what else do you know of this curse? And why now, after all these years, does it stir? Before she could answer, a piercing scream shattered the silence, echoing through the manor's stone walls. Poirot and Mrs. Wren exchanged a glance, their conversation cut short. Without a word, they hurried toward the source, the dining room where the guests had gathered after breakfast. The storm's relentless hammering seemed to mock their haste. Tea. The wind's wail blending with the lingering echo of the scream. They burst into the dining room to find chaos. Lady Beatrice, still pale from her poisoning, was clutching her throat, her eyes wide with terror. The colonel, his face flushed with anger, was shouting at the doctor, who stood frozen, his hands raised, as if to ward off an attack. Lord Ashburn stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, while the other guests minor figures in the Manor's drama. A solicitor and a distant cousin hovered nervously at the edges. "What has happened?" Poirot demanded, his voice cutting through the din like a blade. "It was her," the colonel bellowed, pointing at Lady Beatrice. "She tried to poison me now. My whodunit tasted wrong, bitter." Lady Beatrice shook her head frantically, her voice hoarse. "I did no such thing. I was drinking from my own glass when I felt it again, the burning, the dizziness. Someone tampered with my drink." Poirot's eyes swept the room, taking in the overturned wineglass, the faint stain of red on the tablecloth, and the guests' expressions: fear, accusation, and something deeper, a collective guilt that seemed to seep from the Manor's very walls. He knelt beside the table, sniffing the spilled wine, his nose wrinkling at a faint, acrid undertone. "Arsenic, perhaps," he murmured, his mind already cataloguing the symptoms. He turned to the doctor, whose face was ashen. "Monsieur le Docteur, you will assist me. We must act quickly." The doctor, trembling, nodded, and produced a small vial of antidote from his bag, the same one Poirot had used earlier. As he administered it to Lady Beatrice, Poirot's gaze never left Mrs. Wren, who stood silently by the door, her hands clasped tightly. Her confession had opened a door to the past, but the present danger was immediate, palpable. Madame Beatrice Poirot said, helping her to a chair as her breathing steadied. "You are fortunate to have survived a second attempt, but tell me precisely, what did you feel was like before?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "A burning in my throat, then a dizziness as if the room were spinning. I only took a sip, thank God." Poirot nodded, his mind working furiously. The poison, the dagger, the journal, the curzel were threads, but the pattern remained elusive. He turned to the group, his presence commanding their attention. "Mesdames et messieurs, it is clear that someone in this room seeks to silence others, to bury the secrets of Ashburn Manor in blood. But Hercule Poirot will not permit this. We will remain here, together, until the truth is revealed." The colonel scoffed, his mustache bristling. "You think you can trap a killer by locking us in a room? This is madness, Poirot. We're all targets." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice calm but firm. "But the killer, he is also trapped, and that, mon ami, is his mistake." The guests settled uneasily. Poirot motioned for Mrs. Wren to join him in a corner. "You have more to tell, I think," he said quietly. "The curse, the dagger there, is a connection to the present, to these attempts on Lady Beatrice's life. Speak, madame." Mrs. Wren hesitated, her eyes darting to the portrait on the wall of the same stern-faced woman from the parlor. "A test. Eleanor, my mother," she said softly. "She died in this house, you know, not of illness, but of heartbreak. To the Ashburns. They used her, then discarded her. Swore I'd protect this family, even from themselves. But the dagger, it's brought nothing but death. I think someone here believes the curse is real, and they're acting on it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you, Madame Clara, do you believe in this curse?" She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I believe in vengeance, Monsieur Poirot. And I believe someone in this house has waited a long time to claim it." The day wore on, the storm showing no sign of abating. Poirot orchestrated the group's movements like a conductor, ensuring no one was alone, no opportunity for further attacks. He interviewed each guest again, probing for inconsistencies, and, but their stories held each layered with half-truths and deflections. The colonel's bluster hid a flicker of fear. The doctor's nervousness bordered on panic. Lord Ashburn's calm was too perfect, too rehearsed. And Mrs. Wren, with her newfound candor, remained an enigma. Her loyalty to the Ashburns warring with her own suppressed anger as evening fell. Poirot gathered the guests in the library, the site of the housekeeper's earlier collapse. The room was a cavern of shadows, its shelves groaning under the weight of centuries-old books. Poirot stood before the fireplace, the torn journal page in his hand. Its words, a silent accusation. "This page," he said, holding it aloft, "speaks of a blood debt, a curse born of betrayal." But Hercule Poirot does not believe in curses. He believes in motives, in greed, in revenge. Someone in this room has used the legend of the sapphire dagger to mask their intentions. The poison, the threats, they are not the work of a ghost, but of a human hand. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to one another. Lady Beatrice, still weak, clutched a shawl around her shoulders. "Then who?" she demanded. "Who wants me dead?" Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on Mrs. Wren. "That, madame, is what we will discover. We must understand the past. Madame Wren, you spoke of your mother, of the dagger's curse. Tell us what became of Vikram Roe, the man who cursed the Ashburns." Mrs. Wren's face tightened, but she answered, "He vanished, they say. After the betrayal, he was never seen again. Some said he died in the war, others that he returned to India, plotting his revenge. But his family, they wrote letters demanding the dagger's return. Those letters are still here, locked in the manor's archives." Poirot's eyes lit up. "The archives, you say? Then we must see them. Now," Lord Ashburn protested, citing the late hour and the storm. But Poirot was implacable. With Mrs. Wren leading the way, they descended to the manor's basement, a labyrinth of damp stone and flickering torches. The archives were a cluttered room filled with dusty ledgers and sealed boxes, the air heavy with the scent of mildew. Mrs. Wren unlocked a cabinet, revealing a bundle of yellow letters tied with twine. Poirot opened one, his fingers careful as he unfolded the brittle paper. The handwriting was precise, the tone furious. "The dagger is ours, stolen by blood. Return it, or the Ashburns will know no peace." The signature was unmistakable. Vikram Roe. "There are dozens of these," Mrs. Wren said. "Year after year, his descendants wrote, demanding justice. The Ashburns ignored them, hid the letters, but someone found them. I'm sure of it." Poirot's mind churned, the pieces of the puzzle shifting. The dagger, the curse, the poison all pointed to a vendetta. But whose? He turned to the group, his voice steady. "Mies, Amos, we are close to the truth, but we must be vigilant. Killer is among us, and they will strike again unless we act." As they returned to the main house, the storm's fury seemed to mirror the tension within. Poirot's thoughts were a whirlwind, each clue a thread he wove into a tapestry of motive and opportunity. Mrs. Wren's confession had illuminated the past, but the present danger was immediate. The second attempt on Lady Beatrice's life suggested desperation, a killer growing reckless, and yet Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction, Kay's certainty that he was closing in. The night ended with the guests confined to their rooms, Poirot's orders enforced by Lord Ashburn's reluctant agreement. Alone in his chamber, Poirot sat at a small desk, the journal page and a letter from Vikram Roe before him. "Kay." He traced the words with a finger, his mind racing. "Kay." The housekeeper's truth had opened a door, but another remained locked. Someone in the manor was not who they seemed, and Poirot, with his little gray cells, was determined to unmask them before the storm broke. Chapter 9. The penultimate trap. The air in Ashburn Manor hung heavy, saturated with the damp chill of the Yorkshire storm that refused to relent. The ancient walls, steeped in centuries of secrets, seemed to lean inward, as if conspiring to trap the truth within their stone embrace. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the drawing room, his small, precise frame a stark contrast to the cavernous space around him. The guests, Lord Reginald Ashburn, Lady Beatrice, the Colonel, the Doctor, and the housekeeper sat in a tense semicircle, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of a single candelabrum. The power outage from the previous night had not been resolved, and the manor's isolation felt more oppressive than ever. Poirot's mustache twitched as he surveyed the room, his sharp green eyes darting from one guest to another, cataloging every nervous tick, every fleeting glance. The events of the past days, the missing sapphire dagger, the blood-dead journal, the poisoned heiress. The Colonel's staged gunshot had woven a tapestry of deceit so intricate that even he, as a great detective, felt the weight of its complexity. Yet he was not deterred. His little gray cells, as he fondly called them, were alight with purpose. Tonight he would set a trap to unmask the mastermind behind the manor's deadly charade. Mise Amos. Poirot began, his voice calm, but commanding, cutting through the crackle of the fire. We have reached a moment most critical. The threads of this mystery, they are tangled, yes, but not unbreakable. Tonight, I, Hercule Poirot, will announce the identity of the one who has orchestrated this dance of death. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice, her face pale but composed after her brush with poison, clutched her locket tightly. The Colonel, his grizzled features set in a scowl, shifted in his chair, his hands balled into fists. The Doctor, Dr. Clarence Whitmore, stared at the floor, his fingers twitching as if longing for the vial of poison Poirot had confiscated. The housekeeper, Mrs. Grimsby, sat rigidly, her dark eyes glinting with something unreadable fear, perhaps, or defiance. Lord Ashburn, the host, leaned forward, his aristocratic features taut with anticipation. But first, Poirot continued, raising a hand to silence the murmurs. I must set the stage. The truth, it is like a fine wine, it requires time to breathe. And so, I have devised a plan. At the stroke of midnight, in this very room, I will reveal the killer. Until then, I ask that you remain vigilant. The one who seeks to harm us is cunning, and they are among us now. The announcement was a calculated risk, a spark tossed into a powder keg, for I knew the killer would not sit idly by while he tightened the noose. By declaring his intent, he was forcing their hand, compelling them to act. He had already taken precautions. The hidden passage behind Lord Ashburn's study was under watch, guarded by a trusted footman who had been discreetly instructed to report any movement. The sapphire dagger, now locked in Poirot's suitcase, was safe from tampering. And yet, he felt a prickle of unease. The mastermind was close, and their desperation would make them dangerous. As the guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls, Poirot lingered in the drawing room, his mind racing. The doctor's confession the previous night had been illuminating. Dr. Whitmore had admitted to orchestrating the threats to avenge his sister, Sister Eleanor, who had been Lord Ashburn's brother's true love, killed in a scandal years ago. But Poirot's instincts told him the doctor was not the architect of this plot. His actions were too clumsy, his motives too personal. No, the true killer was someone with a colder, more calculating mind, someone who had manipulated the doctor's grief to serve a larger purpose. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Mrs. Grimsby, her gaunt frame silhouetted against the dim hallway. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and urgent, "I must speak with you, alone." He gestured for her to enter, closing the door behind her. "Madame, you have my attention. What is it that troubles you?" She hesitated, her hands twisting in her apron. "I know you suspect me, sir. Then perhaps you're right too. But I swear, I've only ever wanted to protect this family. The Ashburns. They're my blood, even if they've cast me aside. I hid that journal page to keep the truth buried, but I see now it was a mistake." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The truth, Madame Grimsby. You speak of the blood debt, the curse tied to the sapphire dagger, but there is more, is there not? You know who seeks to harm the guests of this manor." Her lips trembled, and for a moment Poirot thought she might collapse. I cannot say for certain," she whispered, "but I've seen things. Shadows, moving in the night, whispers in the corridors. Someone in this house is not what they seem. I beg you, monsieur, be careful. It's the one you seek. They are watching you." Before Poirot could press her further, a sharp cry echoed from the upper floors, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Mrs. Grimsby flinched, her eyes wide with terror. Poirot was already moving, his small frame surprisingly swift as he dashed toward the staircase. "Stay here," he ordered, though he doubted she would obey. The cry had come from the west wing, where the guest rooms were located. As Poirot reached the corridor, he saw Lady Beatrice standing outside her room, her hands pressed to her mouth. The door to the colonel's room was ajar, and a cold draft swept through the hall, carrying the scent of rain and something metallic blood. Poirot pushed past Lady Beatrice and entered the colonel's room. The window was shattered, shards of glass glinting on the floor like scattered jewels. The colonel stood by his bed, clutching his arm, where a thin trickle of blood seeped through his sleeve. "Someone threw a stone," he barked. His voice, thick with anger, came right through the window. "Nearly took my head off." Poirot's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail: the overturned chair, the crumpled rug, the faint smear of mud near the window. He knelt to examine the stone, a jagged piece of flint, no larger than a fist. Attached to it was a scrap of paper secured with a piece of twine. He carefully untied it, his gloved fingers deft and precise. The note was written in a hurried scrawl: "Leave now, or the next will not miss." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his mind racing. The attack was a warning, but not for the colonel. It was meant for him, a message to abandon his trap. He straightened, his expression unreadable. "Colonel, you are unharmed. This wound, it is superficial." The colonel grunted, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a shallow cut. "I'll live, but whoever did this is playing a dangerous game." "Indeed," Poirot said, slipping the note into his pocket. "And they have just made their first mistake." He returned to the corridor, where Lady Beatrice and the doctor had now gathered, drawn by the commotion. Lord Ashburn appeared moments later, his face pale but composed. "What the devil is going on?" he demanded. "A small incident," Poirot said smoothly, "but it confirms my suspicions. The killer grows restless. They fear the truth is near." The doctor's eyes darted nervously. "You said you'd revealed the killer at midnight. Is this their doing?" Poirot smiled faintly, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Perhaps, doctor, or perhaps they wish us to believe so. Return to your rooms, all of you. I will handle this matter." As the guests retreated, Poirot made his way to the hidden passage behind Lord Ashburn's study. The footman he had stationed there, a young man named Thomas, was waiting, his face pale but resolute. "No one's come through, sir," he reported, "but I heard a scraping sound, like someone moving behind the walls." Poirot nodded, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The passage was the key, a vein running through the manor's heart, connecting its secrets. He descended the narrow staircase, his lantern casting long shadows on the damp stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of mold and time, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant howl of the storm at the bottom of the passage. He found what he had suspected. A small alcove, barely noticeable, hidden behind a loose stone. Inside was a bundle of letters, yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. Poirot scanned them quickly, his heart quickening. They were love letters, written by Eleanor Whitmore, the doctor's sister, to Lord Ashburn's late brother, Edward. The words were tender, desperate, filled with promises of a future that never came. But one letter stood out, written in a different hand, Lord Ashburn's. It was a cold, formal missive, demanding Eleanor end the affair or face ruin. Poirot's lips tightened. The pieces were falling into place. The doctor's confession had been truthful, but incomplete. He had been manipulated, his grief weaponized by someone who knew the Ashburn family's darkest secrets. And that someone had access to this passage, to these letters, to the very heart of the matter's history. He returned to the drawing room where the guests had reconvened, their faces etched with dread. The clock on the mantel read 11 o'clock, only 1 hour until his promised revelation. Poirot knew he could not wait. The killer was moving, and he had to act. "Mies, Amos," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "I have made a discovery that cannot wait until midnight. The hidden passage. It has yielded its secrets. Letters, written by Mademoiselle Eleanor Whitmore, and a response from Lord Ashburn himself. They reveal a truth, most painful a truth that has driven someone in this room to murder." The doctor leaped to his feet, his face ashen. "You found them. Then, you know what they did to her." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "I know, doctor, that your sister was wronged. But you are not the only one who seeks vengeance. Someone has used your pain, your anger, to orchestrate this plot. And I believe that someone is about to make their final move." As if on cue, a low groan echoed through the manor, followed by the unmistakable sound of stone grinding against stone. The hidden passage was opening. Poirot's heart raced, but he remained calm, motioning for the guests to stay seated. "Thomas," he called to the footman, "guard the door." The young man nodded, drawing a poker from the fireplace. Poirot moved swiftly to the study, where the bookshelf concealing the passage stood ajar. A cloaked figure emerged, their face obscured by a hood. In their hand gleamed the sapphire dagger, its blade catching the lantern's light. "Arates," Poirot shouted, his voice ringing with authority. The figure froze, then lunged forward, the dagger slashing through the air. Poirot sidestepped, his movements precise, and Thomas tackled the figure to the ground. The hood fell back, revealing the doctor's face, twisted with rage. "I did it for her," Dr. Whitmore screamed, struggling against Thomas's grip. "For Eleanor. They destroyed her, and I'll make them pay." Poirot knelt beside him, his expression stern but not unkind. "Doctor, you have been played. You are not the mastermind of this plot. You are its pawn." The doctor's struggles ceased, his eyes wide with confusion. What do you mean?" Poirot stood, turning to face the guests who had gathered at the study's entrance, drawn by the commotion. "The true killer," he said, "is someone who knew of your pain, doctor. Someone who placed the poison in your bag, who forged the notes, who opened the passage to create chaos. Someone who has watched us all, waiting for the moment to strike." He paused, his gaze settling on Lord Ashburn. The nobleman's face was impassive, but his hands trembled slightly. "Lord Ashburn," Poirot said softly, "you have much to answer for." The room erupted in chaos. Lady Beatrice gasped, the colonel swore, and Mrs. Grimsby clutched her apron, tears streaming down her face. Lord Ashburn stood, his voice steady despite the accusation. "This is preposterous, Poirot. I am the victim here, not the villain." "Nan," Poirot said, his voice like steel. "You are the architect, but I will prove it at midnight, as promised." Until then, Doctor, you will remain in my custody. Thomas, secure him in the library. As the footman led the doctor away, Poirot's mind churned. The trap had worked, but not as he had expected. The doctor's attack was a distraction, a desperate act to protect the true killer. Lord Ashburn's .com demeanor was a facade, a cheat, but Poirot needed evidence irrefutable proof to bring him down. The final hour before midnight was a blur of activity. Keat. Poirot searched the doctor's room, finding a hidden compartment in his medical bag containing a forged letter written in Lord Ashburn's hand, instructing the doctor to place the poison. It was clever, almost perfect, but Poirot's eye caught a subtle, floor misspelled word, a quirk of handwriting that matched the note tied to the stone. As the clock struck midnight, the guests gathered once more in the drawing room. Poirot stood before them, the sapphire dagger in one hand, the forged letter in the other. "The game is over," he said. The doctor believed he was avenging his sister, but he was manipulated by the one who invited us here, the one who knew every secret of this manor. "Lord Ashburn, it is time to confess." The nobleman's facade cracked, his eyes blazing with defiance. But Poirot was relentless, presenting the letter, the handwriting analysis, the hidden letters in the passage. The evidence was overwhelming, and the guests turned on their host, their fear giving way to outrage. Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction as he watched Lord Ashburn's defenses crumble. The trap had worked, not by catching the killer in the act, but by forcing them to reveal their hand. The doctor was a pawn, the dagger a symbol, but the true crime was Ashburn's attempt to bury his family's sins. Chapter 10. The Final Reckoning. The storm that had battered Ashburn Manor for 3 relentless days began to relent as dawn crept over the Yorkshire moors. The wind, once a howling beast, now whimpered, and the rain softened to a drizzle that pattered against the manor's ancient leaded windows. Inside, the air was heavy with suspicion, fear, and the weight of secrets that had festered like rot in the manor's stone walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand drawing room, his small, precise frame a stark contrast to the towering oak-panelled walls adorned with faded portraits of Ashburn ancestors. His mustache was impeccably groomed, his eyes sharp as ever, glinting with the quiet confidence of a man who had unraveled the tangled threads of human deceit. The guests were assembled before him, a motley tableau of guilt and dread. Lady Beatrice, pale but recovering from her poisoning, sat rigidly on a velvet chaise, her fingers clutching a lace handkerchief. The colonel, his face a map of weathered lines and suppressed rage, stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back as if to restrain himself from striking out. The doctor, now unmasked as a conspirator and confined to a chair with his wrists loosely bound by a scarf Poirot had borrowed from Lady Beatrice, stared at the floor, his earlier defiance replaced by a hollow resignation. The housekeeper, Mrs. Elspeth, hovered near the door, her eyes darting between Poirot and the others. Her loyalty to the Ashburn legacy, now a fractured shield. Lord Reginald Ashburn himself occupied the center of the room, his aristocratic poise frank at the edges, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as though anchoring himself against an impending storm. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, a deliberate gesture that drew every eye to him. The room fell silent, save for the faint crackle of the fire and the distant drip of rainwater from a leak in the ceiling. He cleared his throat, his voice calm but resonant, carrying the weight of truth about to be unveiled. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his Belgian accent lending a musical cadence to his words. "We have gathered here, in this house of shadows, to confront the darkness that has brought us to the brink of tragedy. For 3 days, I, Hercule Poirot, have observed, listened, and employed the little gray cells to untangle the web of lies spun within these walls. And now, the moment of reckoning has arrived." Lady Beatrice's breath hitched, and the colonel's, jaw tightened. Lord Ashburn's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing his patrician features. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the polished floor, each step a metronome counting down to revelation. "Let us begin," Poirot said, "with the events that have unfolded. A letter, cryptic and urgent, summoned me to Ashburn Manor. A dagger, sapphire-encrusted and steeped in a history of betrayal, vanished and reappeared, stained with blood. A journal page spoke of a blood debt. A poison vial threatened lives, and a hidden passage allowed a phantom to slip through the manor's heart. Each clue, each act, was a piece of a puzzle I have now completed." He paused, turning to face Lord Ashburn, whose composure faltered for a fraction of a second. "But before I reveal the architect of this malevolent design, let us revisit the motives that have simmered among you all." Poirot turned to Lady Beatrice, his gaze softening but unyielding. "Lady Beatrice, you carried the weight of a lost love lord, Ashburn's brother, Edward, whose death you blamed yourself for, though you swore it was no murder. Your guilt was a shadow, but it was not the hand that wielded the dagger or the poison." She nodded, her eyes glistening, but said nothing. Her silence a testament to her relief at being absolved. Poirot's attention shifted to the Colonel. "Colonel Hargreaves, your secret was one of wartime's Shima betrayal of Lord Ashburn's father that enriched this estate and cursed the sapphire dagger. You staged an attack upon yourself, did you not? A clever ruse to deflect suspicion, but your revolver betrayed you." The Colonel's face reddened, but he held his tongue, his military bearing barely containing his indignation. Next, Poirot faced the doctor, whose head remained bowed. "Dr. Whitmore, you confessed to forging records to conceal Edward Ashburn's death, claiming it was an accident. But the poison in your bag told a different story, one of vengeance for your sister, Edward's true love, lost in the scandal. You were a pawn, n'est-ce pas? A man driven by grief, but not the mastermind." The doctor's shoulders slumped. Further, his silence, an admission of his role. Finally, Poirot's eyes settled on Mrs. Elspeth. "And you, Madame Elspeth, the keeper of Ashburn's secrets. You spoke of a curse, of a dagger that carried vengeance. You hid the journal page to protect the family's legacy, but your loyalty was a mask for your own agenda. You knew more than you revealed, yet you were not the one who set this tragedy in motion." Mrs. Elspeth's lips parted, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. He turned, his gaze now fixed on Lord Ashburn, who sat unnaturally still, his knuckles wide against the dark wood of his chair. "Lord Ashburn," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, "it is you who stand at the heart of this darkness. You who invited us here under the guise of fear, claiming a murder was afoot. You who orchestrated every act, every clue, to bury the sins of your family and silence those who knew them." A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice's handkerchief fell to the floor, and the Colonel took a step forward, his fists clenched. Lord Ashburn's face drained of color, but he managed a thin smile, his voice steady but laced with venom. "Monsieur Poirot, this is preposterous. You accuse me in my own home, with no evidence but your fanciful theories." Poirot's smile was small but unyielding. "Ah, but I have evidence, milord. Evidence as clear as the moors after the storm. Let us walk through it, step by step, and see how the little gray cells have triumphed." He began pacing again, his hands clasped behind his back. "First, the letter that summoned me. It was written in your hand, Lord Ashburn, but you claimed it was sent by another. I examined the paperweight's watermark, unique to your personal stationery, betrayed you. You lured me here, knowing my reputation, to lend credibility to your charade." Lord Ashburn's smile faltered, but he said nothing. Second, Poirot continued, the sapphire dagger. You claimed it was stolen, yet reappeared in your study, stained with blood. But whose blood? I tested the stain was pig's blood, procured from the manor's kitchen. Theatrical touch, designed to sow panic and suspicion. The colonel muttered under his breath, and Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. Poirot pressed on. Third, the hidden passage. You, Lord Ashburn, knew of its existence, as it was built by your ancestors to escape creditors and enemies. You used it to move the dagger, to stage the blood, to create the illusion of a phantom killer. But you made a mistake. The dust in the passage was disturbed only in one direction, toward your study. No one else had passed through. Lord Ashburn's fingers twitched, but he remained silent, his eyes boring into Poirot's. Fourth, Poirot said, his voice rising slightly. The poison. Dr. Whitmore carried it, yes, but how did it come to be in his bag? I found a receipt in your desk, my lord, for a chemical purchase made in your name, delivered to a false address. You planted the vial to implicate the doctor, knowing his past would make him a plausible suspect. The doctor's head snapped up, his eyes blazing with realization. You used me, he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. Poirot nodded solemnly. He used you all. Lady Beatrice, your guilt made you a target. Colonel, your shame made you a scapegoat. Mrs. Elspeth, your loyalty made you a pawn. In the first, Hercule Poirot was meant to be the unwitting audience to this performance, lending it legitimacy. Lord Ashburn stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Enough, he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. You weave a tale, Poirot, but where is your proof? A receipt, a watermark, these are trifles. Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. Trifles, you say? Then let us consider the final piece, the fingerprints on the poison vial. I took the liberty of examining it with a magnifying glass and a dusting of powder from my own kit. The prints were not Dr. Whitmore's. They were yours, Lord Ashburn. The room erupted in murmurs. Lady Beatrice clutched her chest, and the colonel swore loudly. Mrs. Elspeth's face crumpled, her loyalty shattered. Lord Ashburn staggered back, his bravado crumbling like ash. Up. Why? Lady Beatrice whispered, her voice breaking. Why would you do this, Reginald? Poirot answered for him, his tone somber. Lord Ashburn sought to erase the past. Tish, you was a link to his family's shame, the betrayal of the colonel, Tesca of Edward's death, the curse tied to the dagger. He invited you here to eliminate you, to frame one among you as the killer, and to emerge as the grieving lord, free of his burdens. The storm was his ally, trapping you here. The dagger, the poison, the passage, all were tools to orchestrate your doom. Lord Ashburn's shoulders sagged, and he sank back into his chair, his face a mask of defeat. You cannot prove intent, he said weakly. Poirot produced a folded letter from his pocket, holding it aloft. This I found in your study, hidden in a false drawer. A draft of the letter you sent to each guest, but with the difference it promised each of you a share of the Ashburn estate if you attended. A lie designed to lure you here, and in your own hand you wrote a note to yourself. The curse ends with their silence. The room fell deathly silent. Lord Ashburn's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the cold realization of his defeat. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his fight extinguished. Poirot stepped closer, his voice softening but firm. You underestimated the little gray cells, my lord. You thought to manipulate, to deceive, to kill, but the truth, it always finds a way, like water through the cracks of a dam. Lord Ashburn's head bowed, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, it was for the family, for the name, the curse. It haunted us. I thought, if they were gone, it would end. The confession hung in the air, heavy and final, Lady Beatrice wept quietly. The colonel turned away, and Mrs. Elspeth stared at her half-brother with a mixture of pity and horror. Dr. Whitmore, still bound, shook his head, his anger spent. Poirot straightened, his task complete. "Authorities will arrive soon," he said. "The storm has cleared, and the road is passable. Lord Ashburn, you will answer for your crimes." As if on cue, the distant sound of a motor car rumbled through the open window, signaling the arrival of the police. The guests stood, shaken but relieved, as Poirot directed a footman to escort Lord Ashburn to his room until the authorities could take him. The drawing-room emptied, leaving Poirot alone with the flickering fire and the portraits of the Ashburns, their painted eyes seeming to judge the living. He walked to the window, gazing out at the moors, now bathed in the pale light of a new day. The weight of the case settled over him, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the human heart's capacity for greed, for desperation, for darkness. "Monsieur Poirot," came a soft voice. Mrs. Elspeth stood in the doorway, her face etched with sorrow. "You saw through it all. How did you know?" Poirot turned, a faint smile on his lips. "The little gray cells, madame. You see what others do not, the patterns, the inconsistencies, the truth beneath the lies, and the heart. It always betrays itself in the end." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and left him to his thoughts. Poirot adjusted his hat, picked up his walking stick, and stepped toward the door. The manor, with its secrets and its curse, would fade into memory, but his reputation as the master detective would endure as he stepped into the morning light. The moors stretching endlessly before him, Hercule Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction. The case was closed, the truth revealed, and justice, however painful, would prevail.